Welcome to the Full Stack FlutterFlow Master Course. I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know to build full stack mobile apps and web SaaS platforms. My name is Aleem and I've been a full stack app developer for about 10 years now. I built apps for the biggest brands in the United States. I started my first B2B SaaS company in 2019 called Season Share, where I built software for NBA, NFL, NCAA teams like the Orlando Magic, the San Antonio Spurs, the San Francisco 49ers, who are actually an investor in my company, Ohio State, and much, much more. I was the CTO where I led the development team and I built very complex ticketing technology that powered over 3 million users at any given time. I also led software engineering for Hornet Hyperloop, a SpaceX project that I did in college where we actually ranked top 13 in the world for. I was the software engineering lead there, where I led the ground control system and built the application that connected to the onboard processing unit that kept track of the pod telemetry. And actually at that time, I did get a chance to meet Elon Musk where we pitched our pod to him on campus at SpaceX. I'll make sure to leave a picture right here of that experience. It was a really fun time. Most recently, I led mobile engineering at PrizePicks, which is now the #1 daily fantasy sports app on the App Store in the United States. If you take your phone out, open up the App Store, go to the sports tab, you'll see PrizePicks normally hanging out around #1. So now I run the biggest app development academy called Ambitious Labs. My mission is to teach as many builders how they can build apps themselves, because now in the age of no code and AI, the barrier of entry to software development has been eliminated. So this course is going to be friendly for all skill levels. And I'm not joking when I say this, but my intent for this masterclass is to replace an entire computer science degree. And fun fact, I recently taught this exact tech stack to college students at UC Berkeley. They recruited me to guest lecture their product launch class under the Sudarja School of Entrepreneurship. I'll make sure to leave a picture here as well of me teaching 40 students most recently. So you don't need any coding experience. You just need to be ready to focus, roll up your sleeves, and build. I'm also designing this course in a way where you can easily navigate through it in case there's one specific thing that you came to this video to learn. I'll leave a table of contents in the description below with timestamps to each topic. My goal with this video is to have a world-class resource, my highest quality free resource that I can point to anybody in the world that I meet with a mobile or web app idea. Also, if you're not entirely sold on this tech stack, FlutterFlow, Firebase, BuildShip, RevenueCat, and the others that I like to champion, that's okay, but here's my honest opinion. This tech stack is the most beginner-friendly, low-code app development stack. And if you can get through this course and successfully acquire the skills to build apps with these technologies, I promise you, you'll be able to do it with any other technology as well. This is the same pattern that I was being told earlier in my career when I was trying to decide what programming languages to learn. I was told that pick one, get good at it, because the other programming languages utilize the exact same concepts. So if you know one programming language, you can pick up the others. The same applies here in the world of low code and AI. As long as you learn the high level architecture of how apps work, you'll be able to apply those skills across any technology, because fundamentally the underlying mechanics are the same. Cool, so let's jump in. Here's the table of contents for this masterclass. So the first thing that we'll cover is programming fundamentals. I believe that anybody who's trying to build an application, regardless of its no code or low code, should understand the basics of programming to understand the mechanics under the hood. Then we'll go into widgets, and in Flutter, everything is a widget. I'm going to take an approach to this course where you will not only understand how to use FlutterFlow and no-code tools, but you will also understand the fundamentals of Flutter, the underlying programming framework as well. So I've been asked many times, like, can I learn how to become a Flutter developer using FlutterFlow? And I believe the answer is yes. So I'm also going to approach this course in a way where you can acquire the Flutter developer skills, so you don't just limit yourself to FlutterFlow. So I'll make sure to cover as much Flutter as I can in this course. Third, UI development. UI stands for user interface, and I'm going to show you how to assemble a set of widgets in an application to build really beautiful user interfaces. I also have some unique insight because I am a FlutterFlow ambassador, and I get an inside scoop into how FlutterFlow themselves want us to use the application. And sneak peek, they actually don't want us to use tools like Figma to design. They want us to use FlutterFlow for design. So we'll learn about that mindset and how to be a designer while you build an application. Number 4, actions and navigation. So how do you make your app actually do stuff when users tap, touch, swipe on it? And we'll get into that. Number 5, page parameters. So how do you pass data between pages and create more complex logic there? Then number 6, page state and app state. Number 7, user input. Number 8, Firebase, where we'll jump into how to connect the backend into FlutterFlow and actually bring your app to life. Number 9, we'll talk about authentication and how to create sign up and sign in systems so that you can keep track of your user profiles. Firestore, so the database product built by Google. Object-oriented thinking. This is a framework of thought that I really want everyone to acquire when they're thinking about how to build applications, because when you're building apps and software, you're actually moving around big pieces of data and thinking about patterns to make that data kind of relate to each other. In computer science, we call this object-oriented design, where you're actually designing many objects, and objects are just straight up things. Like if you're designing a car marketplace, we have cars and dealers and drivers, right? So each one of those nouns are actually an object in the world of object-oriented design. API integrations, many of y'all want to integrate third-party data or services into your platform. So I'll teach you the basics of APIs, and then we will do projects. These are going to be mini projects, and if you are in the Dreams into Apps basic training and you're watching this course, you're going to be required to do the Authenticated to-do app project. These are projects that are going to contain pretty much all the building blocks that you will need to learn to build pretty much any application. A to-do app is an app that kind of keeps track of your to-do items. Think a to-do list, but an application. And actually, whenever you're learning new app development frameworks, even as a developer, say you were learning React or Vue.js, many times developers, even if they're very experienced senior software engineers, they will go to YouTube and look up like React to-do list application tutorial, because that is pretty much like the flagship tutorial that teaches you CRUD operations. And we'll learn more about CRUD later in the course, but it teaches you all the operations that you would need to create, read, update, delete data from a database. So if you can build a to-do app in pretty much one technology, you can apply those same skills to any other technology. All right, that's our table of contents. Let's jump into step 1, programming fundamentals. So to kick off programming fundamentals, the first thing I want to cover is data types. So computers are all about manipulating data, but computers can only understand certain types of data. And in a computer science class, one of the first things that you learn is data types. So the underlying code that is being written when you build an app that uses Flutter or FlutterFlow is actually called Dart. Flutter is a programming framework, and you can think of a framework as a toolkit, like think of a box of tools. So Flutter is the framework, Flutter is the box of tools. And within that box of tools comes a programming language called Dart. Dart is the actual language that is being handwritten when you are building apps with FlutterFlow. So it's important for us to understand the basics of Dart, because this is the programming language that's powering all the drag and drop, click, point, drag stuff that you see on FlutterFlow itself. So the Dart language has support for certain data types. The first data type that it has support for is numbers. Okay, numbers are numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9999999. Okay, so if you click on numbers here, we'll see what the definition of a number is. So integers are numbers without a decimal point. And numbers can come in 2 flavors. An integer, which is a number without a decimal point, any whole number. And then there's something called a double precision number in computer science. But what Dart has done is it's combined integers and doubles into one data type called numbers. So doubles are essentially any number with a decimal point, like 1.5, 2.66666. Like those are examples of doubles, and then examples of integers are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is the first data type. The second major data type to understand is a string. You will hear the word string used a lot. A string is a sequence of letters and numbers, and these are some examples of strings, right? You can use single quotes if you're writing code to represent a string, but essentially a string is just a sentence. It can be like a real logical sentence, or it could just literally be like a random string of letters, right? So a string is anything, any piece of data that can be represented using a collection of characters and numbers kind of in order. So all of these things that you see here are strings. So words, sentences, all that stuff are strings, okay? Next, we have Booleans. We will learn more about Booleans when we talk about logic, but Booleans have two values, and computers can only understand two values, zeros and ones. That's actually all a computer really understands, believe it or not. The lowest level of computation that a computer can understand is literally 0 and 1. And why does that make sense? Well, think about the computer and the chip inside this machine. Your chips are made up of a bunch of small resistors. Those resistors literally just have two modes, on and off. And the way that it works is that if that resistor takes a small electrical charge, that will indicate 1. And if the charge doesn't exist, that will indicate 0. So 1 is the same thing as true in computer science, and 0 is the same thing as false in computer science. And as a matter of fact, if you ask your computer, like, is 1 equal to true? Your computer is going to say, yes, that's true. And if you say, is 0 equal to false? Your computer is going to say, yes, that is true. And if you don't believe me, let me show you an example of how that works. So what you see here on my screen is my terminal, where I actually have a very small programming interface. And watch this. If I say 0 equals true, my computer will return false. But if I say 0 equals false, my computer returns true. So what's happening here? Well, essentially, I'm in a code command line called Node.js. Every computer has a terminal or a command line here, and I just spun this up to write some basic code statements. So this statement here that I'm writing is essentially a comparison statement. It says 0, is it equal to false? If I use two equal signs, that is essentially telling Node.js, which is the underlying code language here. It's saying, hey, can you compare these two values, 0 and false, and tell me if it's true or false? That's all it's really doing here. Two data types. We talked about numbers, strings, and Booleans, which are the most important ones that you're going to use a lot. I'm going to pass over records. I'm going to pass over functions. Now we're going to talk about lists, okay? Lists are a very common collection that every app uses. Literally every app is literally just a list. Like, you probably have never thought about it that way, but if you open up any app on your phone and you kind of scroll through, you'll know that you'll see that everything is just a list. Like, for example, your messages on your phone, they're just lists of messages. Your Instagram feed is just a list of posts and pictures. That's what apps are. They're just lists. So understanding lists really well is going to be critical in this process. So if you've taken a computer science class, or if you've had any exposure to computer science, you might have heard of the concept of an array. An array is the same thing as a list in low-code development. An array is an ordered group of objects, okay? Objects can be anything here, so don't get too caught up in what an object is. In Dart, arrays are list objects, so most people just call them lists. You're going to see the word list used a lot in FlutterFlow. You're going to be able to toggle an option that says like is list. And if essentially you toggle something as a list, that pretty much says you can have more than one of a single data type represented in one piece of data. So look at this list. So var means variable. And essentially what we're talking about today is types of data that you can use as variables. We're going to talk about variables next in this programming concepts, but I have here a variable, and the variable name is called list. Think about algebra when you had a variable like x or y or z, right? You'd say y equals 5, and then you would say, what's y plus 5? Well, if y equals 5, then you substitute y for 5. 5 plus 5 equals 10. So that same concept applies here in programming, where you have a variable named list, and list is equal to a list of strings, and each string is a name of what seems like a vehicle, like a car, a boat, or a plane. And the way that you represent lists in Dart or in most coding languages is by using the square brackets on your keyboard. So here I have a variable list, and that's set to car, boat, and plane. It's important to understand how lists are counted for. So let me open back up my terminal so that you can see an example of it in Node.js, which is very similar to how Flutter works. All right, so I have open here a terminal, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say var list of sports equals open bracket, and I'm going to say football, close, comma, basketball. Okay. This is how you declare a variable in Node.js, which is not the same as Flutter, but it has the same semantics here. We have var, which says, hey, I'm going to set up a variable called list of sports, and I'm going to set this variable list of sports to open bracket football and basketball. Then if I hit enter, nothing happens. What I want to show you is how computers count the number of items in a list. So computers start counting at 0. They don't start counting at number 1. So if I'm counting like, where is the word basketball in this list? You as a human are going to say, well, it's not the first one, which is number 1. It's the second one. So you're going to say it's number 2 in the list. But that's not how computers think. Computers are actually saying football is at position 0 and basketball is at position 1. Okay, so let me show you how that makes sense. So if I say list of sports, I can actually set the position that I want. I can say, hey, give me the first item in list of sports. And if I use the 0 index, index is the same thing as position. Notice that it returns me football because computers start counting at 0. So this is called index notation, where you can actually get an object from, or excuse me, get item from index. And you're going to see that in FlutterFlow as well. You're going to see an option that says get item from index or get index in list. So if I say list of sports brackets 1, it's going to give me basketball because basketball is at index 1. So that's what you need to understand here. When you are counting items in a list, you always start from 0. Okay. And what I'm going to do for the rest of the tutorial is I'm going to move away from Node.js, and I'm actually going to open up a Flutter coding environment, and we're going to write Flutter just so I don't confuse you. Everything else you've seen so far is very similar to Flutter, but we're going to actually move into writing some real Dart. That way it stays consistent. So I have open here a VS Code code editor, and I'm going to just recap quickly all the different data types that we learned using Dart. So the first data type that we learned is a string, and I'm going to set a variable called name equals to my name. So ambitious Aleem. And since ambitious Aleem is just a collection of characters, it actually works perfectly as a string. So my name is a string, and an integer or a number that we learned can be something like my age, which is 27. And notice when I put age here as my variable name, I don't have to use quotes because computers understand numbers, and I don't have to tell the computer here that this is a number any other way than just using a number. Okay, then we talked about Booleans, which Boolean can essentially be true or false. So if I'm a male, I can set a variable like is Aleem a male, and I can say true. Okay, or I can say is Aleem a minor, is minor. I can say age greater than 18. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to evaluate this expression, and computers can do very like basic math like really, really well. So if I say, hey computer, I want to know, is Aleem a minor, yes or no? And the way that you're going to find that out is just by comparing two values. Is the age variable that I gave you greater than 18? This is going to resolve to true, right? And if it does resolve to true, think about it. If I'm an app that, say, for any reason, only allows adults to use it, say there's a PG-13 or a PG movie that you want to access, and you don't want to show the information about that movie to minors, you can do this comparison check in your application. You can say, hey, is this person a minor who's logged in? If true, then don't show them the movie. If false, then show them the movie, right? So now you can kind of see how coding is being applied to real applications. And that's something that I wish I knew earlier in my coding career, was like, I learned the basics of coding, but how does it apply to an application? That's what I didn't really understand. List. So now we have a data type that enables us to store a collection of many things. So say I have fruits, and I do have Visual Studio Code enabled here too, so you can kind of see how my AI is at play. but I do like this idea of creating a variable called fruits and setting that equal to a list of fruits. And the fruits are denoted by strings. So it's apple, banana, orange. Okay. And then remember what I was saying, lists are counted starting at 0. So apple exists at index 0, banana is at index 1, and orange is at index 2. So if I wanted to get the value of orange, I can say var orange equals fruits 2, and that's going to return me orange. Okay. Keep in mind, I'm not actually running this code. This is just being written. So if I were to run this code, it would actually like output some of the values here, but I'm not really doing that. Okay, so now that you learned lists and you learned how they start, the last thing I want to talk to you about is maps, which are kind of the same thing as objects. So objects traditionally are pieces of data, big pieces of data that represent a thing. And I actually mean it when I say a thing. Like, for example, let's talk about if we wanted to have a restaurant app that kept track of all the local restaurants. Well, we might have a restaurant that we want to use, and we could say var restaurant, and we can set this to an object. Okay, and objects are denoted using the curly brackets. Okay, so this is different than the square brackets. Square brackets are used to denote lists. Objects, which are things, I like to think of objects like blobs. Like, what's a blob? A blob's just like a splash of something on a surface. A blob of data is just this big piece of data, and you denote that using curly braces. Inside of the curly brace, you have something called a key value pair. Okay, this is super important to understand too. Key value pairs. Key value pairs essentially mean a relationship of two things, a key and a value. So a key is like the label, and the value is what the value or what the label is being represented, is like the representation of that label. So think about it this way. The key of a restaurant would be like name, because every restaurant has a name. And the value would be the value of that name, or like what does that name represent, okay? So every restaurant has a name, every restaurant has a location, every restaurant may have a rating. So we have many keys here, name, location, rating. And these are the keys, and the values are what those keys are being set to. So the name of this restaurant is McDonald's, the location of this restaurant is New York, and then the rating of this restaurant is 4.5. So this is where the magic happens, because when you are interacting with an application on your phone or even just on the internet, you will notice that everything is a list, and then inside that list are actually just representations of objects. Okay, so think about it like on YouTube, for example. On YouTube, we have a list here of many videos. Okay, we have many videos. Each video has the same thing over and over again. A video is an object, and a video has a thumbnail, a video URL, it has a title, an author, the view count, and the date that it was posted, right? But when you're scrolling on YouTube, all you're seeing is a list of those videos. So notice how each video can take the same shape. So if I say var YouTube video, and I let my AI try to complete this, look, it's going to say title, Dart programming tutorial, which is what I'm doing here, duration, is HD, thumbnail, right? What else does a video have? So it has a title, duration, HD, thumbnail, and then the author name, right? My author name is going to be Ambitious Aleem. So pretty much everything on an application is an object. And this, in my opinion, is the most powerful data type that you can learn. But the thing about this is in order to learn how to effectively use an object or create objects like this, you need to know all the primitive data types. Primitive means basic. So if you don't know what a string is, or an integer, or a Boolean, you can't really build an object, because an object is a large piece of data that has a lot of those smaller data types built into it. Did you notice something? Title is a string, duration is a number, is HD is a Boolean and the rest are strings. So I'm actually using many types of data to assemble this larger object. And that's the beauty of software engineering and object-oriented development, which we'll obviously get into more later. Cool. So in the next step in programming fundamentals, we're going to talk about 3 major concepts: operators, expressions, and control flow. Operators are essentially just ways of doing math in programming. So computers are really good at doing math. So if we wanted to create a very simple like calorie calculator, we could do it as follows. Say that we wanted to calculate how many calories somebody consumed. Well, what we can do here is we can say something like var muffin equals 300 calories. And I can say var muffins eaten equals 2. And then I can say, you know, total calories equals muffin times muffins eaten. And this would literally return me 600. Computers are really good at doing math. And so you can always rely on the ability to do basic math like adding, subtracting, multiplication directly from the code. Okay. Now let's talk about expressions. Well, expressions are like statements that you can make to get the code to output you some sort of value. A very basic example is my age example, right? Where if I wanted to detect if somebody was an adult or not, say my app was for adults only, and I have a user here. Let's say var user equals an object, and my user has a name, right? And say this is like Aleem, and say this user Aleem is 27. Okay, well now I have an object called user that represents me. I didn't talk about this in the previous lesson here, but the way that I could access this value age is I can, if I use this AI, I can use this notation here called bracket notation to access the age. But FlutterFlow and no-code tools do this all for you with drag and drop, so you don't really need to think about it. But essentially what I'll do is I'll say var user age equals user age, and then I'll write an expression. I'll say var is adult equals user age greater than 18. So what you see right here is the expression user age greater than 18. That's me telling the code, hey, user age greater than 18, evaluate that expression, run that expression, tell me what the result of that expression is. Okay, then I'm going to cast this over to an int to make sure that we don't have any data problems. You don't have to worry about that. But now I can write the expression. I can say var is adult equals user age greater than 18. And essentially what I'm telling the code here is, hey, evaluate this expression. This is the expression right here, user age greater than 18. Tell me the result of it. And I'm getting from the computer that this will either be true or false based on the age of Aleem. So now I'll say print is adult, okay, and I'll run the code. It says is adult true. So because my age is greater than 18, it says true. But say I drop this down to 7, I hit save and I run it, it'll say is adult false, okay? So what's happening here is that this variable is adult is being set to a Boolean. And this is actually where the fun happens, because now I can do conditional logic. That's the next step here, called conditional logic and control flows, okay? Conditional logic is the art of doing something if a statement is true or false, and doing something else if the opposite of that is there. So if I'm an adult, then give me access to the site. If I'm not an adult, then block me from the site. So we do this with something called if statements, and this is where coding gets really fun. You can create these expressions like evaluate if this expression is true or false, and then do something else. Okay, so we'll say if is adult, then I will say print welcome to the site, or else if I'm not an adult, we'll say you are not allowed to access this website. So let's remove this piece of code and run this all again. Boom. Since my age is set to 7 still, the program is telling me you're not allowed to access this website. But if I set my age to say 47 and then I run this code, it says welcome to the website. So this is a very basic if statement in computer programming, and FlutterFlow allows you to do this with a very visual builder. So if you understand all of these concepts now, you're off to a really good start, and you understand at the code level what's happening. Now, when you use the visual editor in FlutterFlow, you're going to be so much more powerful because whenever you have an error or a bug or something's not working the way that you want it to, you're going to know under the hood how the code is being evaluated. And that's what's going to set you apart from a mediocre low code builder to one that can think like a real developer and build a high quality application very fast. Next, I want to talk about loops. Loops is a programming structure that allows you to repeat a piece of code over and over again until a specific condition is met. Loops are everywhere, and this is where apps can become very powerful because you can now start combining lists or arrays with pieces of code that repeat themselves for every list in that array. So let's jump in here to VS Code and I'll walk you through an exercise. So the most common loop is a for loop, and you don't really need to know this exact type of loop, but I'm going to show you later in this course how loops are actually used inside of FlutterFlow under the hood. So by understanding the mechanics of this for loop concept, you will just be a lot better off as a low code builder. So the biggest use of a for loop is to iterate over a list, and iterate means to move from one item to another in a list. So for example, say we had a list of products for an e-commerce store. We can use a for loop to iterate over the list of products, so repeat something again and again for each product to display them on our website. So the loop will run a piece of code over and over again for each item in the list. And the reason I capitalize for each is because when you are studying loops in computer science school, you actually will use this term for each. Like, say I have an array, for each item in the array, do X, Y, Z. So let's talk about this. Example 1, creating a list of products for your e-commerce store. Let's start by creating a list of products using a variable called products where we have apple, banana, orange. Let me try something else. Let's do shoe products, and we'll let my AI handle this. Cool. So now we just created a list of shoes, but I don't really like that. I want to do a array of objects like this. So now I have an array, and each item in the array is an object that represents a shoe. And the shoe has two keys, name and price, and then the value of the name is set to the shoe that it is. So Nike Air Max, and the price of the shoe is set to 150, and we have, two other shoes here. Fantastic. So now if I'm building a e-commerce store, I may want to create one box on my page for each shoe that I have for sale, right? So that's where the power of loops come in. Rather than you having to create that box yourself again and again and again, in FlutterFlow, you can create that box once and then utilize a for loop strategy to go through every item in your collection of shoes and then repeat that box for you. So the way that it would work in a for loop perspective is you would say for var I equals 0, for I equals 0, I is less than shoe products.length I plus plus. What the heck does that mean, right? So this is the architecture of a for loop, and it's actually not that hard if we break down. For loops take in 3 parameters or 3 inputs. The first one is setting a variable to keep track of how many times the loop will run. So we're going to create a new variable called I, and I just means index. You can set this to anything. So we're going to say, hey, I equals 0. So right now in the computer's memory, I equals 0. And then we're going to say, run this loop as long as I is less than the length or the size of my shoe products array. So my shoe products array is of size 3, okay? 1, 2, 3 shoes. And then essentially what this last step is every time you run the piece of code in here, anytime that this code is ran, increment or add 1 to I. So essentially what happens here is the first time this code is ran, I will equal 0, okay? Then the code gets ran again, then the code finishes, and then what happens is I gets set to 1, okay? Because that's the last step of this for loop here. Every time this code runs, I is incremented by 1, And then the second time this code executes, I will be 1. Okay. Then I will become 2. Okay. And then what's going to happen is when I is 2, the code will run and then it will set I to 3. The code is going to try to run again, but only if I is less than 3, because I needs to be less than shoeproducts.length. And so if I is 3, 3 less than 3 equals false if you evaluate this expression. So what's going to happen is nothing. This loop will only keep running as long as I is less than 3. So it will run if I is 0, it will run if I is 1, it will run if I is 2, but it won't run if I is 3. So this is just how a computer under the hood repeats code over and over again when you are iterating over a list, okay? So I hope you kind of understand that basically. And the way that this works when we are in the code is like this. So we can say var product equals shoe products I. So just like I said, the first time this runs, I is going to be 0, then I will be 1, then 2. So watch what happens when we print this and we run the code. Check this out. Nike Air Max was the first product that was printed. Then what happens is the code runs again, I becomes 1, and then we output Adidas Superstar. Then the code runs again, I equals 2, then we output Vans Old School. So this is basically how a computer will iterate over a list. And I hope you can now see, after I explain to you how I is incremented, how we use this index strategy to iterate over each item in the list. So now that you know the basics of how it works with code, here's another thing. Every time you want to, like, say, render a box on a page for a product, you would essentially be using a for loop like this to create a box for the product as long as there are products in the list to keep iterating over. So that's all I really want you to understand right now. This is as much of like coding as I think you need to learn as far as loops go, because everything else in low code and no code is pretty easy to understand. But when you work with FlutterFlow, I'm going to point out exactly where for loops come into play. So by understanding the mechanics of a for loop, you're going to be much better off as a Flutter programmer. Let's move on to widgets. Everything in Flutter is a widget. That's actually what Flutter is known for. Widgets are things that you see on a screen, like buttons, text fields, pieces of text, input fields, videos, images, and pretty much everything that you see on the screen of an application. Flutter prides itself with creating a library of widgets that allow you to build apps faster. But the thing is that these widgets, if you were to code them in Flutter, they're actually pretty long and kind of complicated to write. I'm going to show you an example of a widget in just a moment so you can see how complicated they actually are. So the beauty of FlutterFlow is that it enables you to create these really beautiful widgets just by dragging and dropping them. But like I said earlier, FlutterFlow is creating the widget code for you under the hood, so you don't actually have to write this really complex code. So here in the Flutter documentation, we're looking at what widgets are. First, I'm going to tap on widget basics. These are all of the widgets that you'll find inside of FlutterFlow as well. We have many types of widgets. We have layout widgets, which are used to organize like how content is laid out. So we use columns to lay out content from top to bottom. We use rows to lay out content from left to right. We have icons, images, rows, text, etc. So let's jump into a very basic one like text, okay? So let's click on text, and you're going to see here how this text would be represented if you were writing the code by hand. So if you wanted just to put a little piece of text on a page, you could use this piece of code right here. And yes, it's quite a bit of code just to literally get one piece of text. So having FlutterFlow do the drag and drop is a lot nicer. However, widgets have something called properties, and properties are ways to modify how a widget feels or interacts or looks, okay? So if you scroll down, you'll notice that we see properties on this widget. So you can set each one of these properties if you were writing code by hand. For example, like text align, text direction, text span. You might even find style or font size in here. So if you were writing code by hand, you could create one of these text widgets like this, okay? And then you could write the code to incorporate the properties. But that can be annoying, right? Like having to actually write it out. So FlutterFlow enables you to just drag these widgets onto a page and then modify those properties using a visual editor. So let's jump into FlutterFlow, and I'm going to start showing you how widgets work there. So I'm creating a new project inside of FlutterFlow called Flutter Training Camp. I'm going to set the package name to Ambitious Labs. I'll turn Firebase off so that we can just get started. Beautiful. So at the top left here, you see your widget palette. This is essentially your toolbox of widgets that you can drag and drop onto your page. So they call them elements here, but they are actually widgets. And notice that these widgets correspond to the same widgets that you see in the Flutter documentation. So you're starting to see how FlutterFlow is an abstraction on top of Flutter, right? So beautiful. For example, say we wanted to organize our content from top to bottom, I would use a column. And what I like to do normally is just kind of clean out the page, and I'll drop a column on the page. So what I just did is I added a column. And if we look at the documentation for a column, it says a widget that displays its children in a vertical array. So children is a concept that we should understand. When you are building widgets in FlutterFlow or building pages in FlutterFlow, you have parent and child relationships with your widgets. Think about how a child is related to a parent. The parent has the child. And similarly in FlutterFlow, when you are adding widgets to your page, you typically nest widgets under each other. So let's say I wanted to have a page that just welcomes me. So I'm going to put text here, and you'll see how this text just got added here. Then I'll add another piece of text right under it. And since that text is a child of a column parent, columns will organize every child vertically, just like the documentation says. So for every item I add in this column, notice as I keep adding more and more items, they're all getting nested under each other. Okay, so that's how columns work. They nest from top to bottom. I'll leave them here and show you another quick thing. Notice how this widget tree, this is called your widget tree right here. Notice how your widget tree is unfolding. We have a column, and if I drop down this column, you'll see that there are many widgets inside of this column. That means that the column is the parent and everything inside of it are children. Okay, so we are seeing in real time how children unfold under a parent. Okay, so let's build a very basic app where it's like a multiple choice question for a quiz. Let's think about like cloning something like Quizlet, right? So I'm gonna lay out a text object here that asks a question, and then we will have a set of options that the user can tap on, like a multiple choice test. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag a piece of text onto the column, and I'm going to explain to you how properties and alignment and layouts work. So the first thing I want to do is change this hello world to a question, like what is the capital of the United States? So let's say, what is the capital of the United States? Okay. I don't really like the way that it's positioned, so I want to move it to the middle. The first step to do that is to identify what the parent object is, or what is the parent element of this piece of text. So we'll go to my widget tree, and I'll see that my parent is column. And column has properties on the right-hand side that we can use. One of the properties that I'm interested in is the alignment property. So we can use this alignment property right here on the right side to align the column within its parent. Notice something. When I tap through different widgets, the properties pane on the right-hand side will change. That's because every widget, as per the Flutter documentation, has its own set of properties down here. Those properties that you see here in Flutter are actually matching up on the right-hand side here in FlutterFlow. So watch what happens as I tap this middle box here on alignment. It actually moved that entire column to be aligned middle in relation to its parent, and its parent is actually the home page. So if I click on column, notice how column takes up this much space. It's telling you where, the space that the column needs to consume is being placed. And if I click on homepage, notice how homepage has a lot more space, but column is a lot smaller. Well, that's because homepage is a limitless bound and column has a limited bound. So you can always just kind of refer to the bounding box that appears when you click on any widget. So long story short, I was able to center align it. Now, if I click on text and scroll to the bottom, we're going to see a lot of properties down here related to text. And these might be familiar to you if you've used stuff like Google Docs before or any other like document editing software. So here I can change this theme text style to something like display small, and it will make this a lot bigger. Then I can use text align center, which is the same type of property you might have been used to seeing in Google Docs, and that will align the content to the middle. Okay. Then what I want to do is I want to then have a set of answers, right? So inside of a column, I want to have let's say a row, and inside that row, I'm going to have another column. And the reason I want that row, I want a layout element that I can use to align everything inside it to the middle. Everything in an app is a collection of rows and columns. And actually, before I go too much farther, let's jump into FigJam so I can show you an exercise as to how this makes sense and how you can think about breaking down your app into rows and columns. So let's move over to FigJam. Now that you know the basics of widgets, I want to talk to you about a certain type of widget called a layout widget. And in FlutterFlow, this is known as a layout element. There are three major types of layouts that I want you to be very mindful of as you build pretty much any type of app going forward. Rows and columns. Rows are used to align items from left to right on a x-axis. You can use columns to align items top to bottom on a y-axis. So here I have a row and here I have a column. Watch as I take this button and I just place 3 buttons inside of this row. Notice how each button in the row is being placed next to each other on the x-axis. If I do the same for a column, you'll notice how the buttons unfold under the column vertically on a y-axis. So every app is actually just a very thought out collection of rows and columns. And in this part of the lesson, I want to show you exactly why that's the case. So I have here 2 websites. I have a YouTube video. That's actually my YouTube video on my channel. This is my most viral video, but YouTube is a very popular site that we'll analyze. And then we'll also analyze a mobile app that's doing about $1 million per month of in-app subscription revenue called Cal AI. What I want to show you here is how apps are a collection of rows and columns. This is a very key concept that even the oldest UI development frameworks like Bootstrap, it's an old framework, but Bootstrap was some early player in the kind of in like the web app development framework space that kind of coined the whole concept of building rows and columns, because rows and columns were the easiest kind of layout strategy to incorporate that would make sites mobile responsive. So check this out. I'm going to make this a red box. So at the top level of the website here, notice we have a row. This row lays out items from left to right. Okay, and you see that there's a logo, search bar, and everything else. Then we have a bigger column here that is laying out things top to bottom. Okay, but then within this column, we have 2 rows. This is a row that's laying out items top to bottom. And then we have this as a row over here that's laying out this stuff top to bottom. And within this row, we have more rows. Excuse me, within this column, we have 2 rows. This row is the video row. Okay. This row is the video row. And then underneath here, we also have another row that contains all of the video details. Then we have another row that contains some of this information. And now we get into where there's a collection of columns. This is a very advanced example, but I wanted to show you on an advanced example so you can see kind of how these things are working here. So we have a column, and inside of this column, you see that there's a title, and then under the title, we have a row. So pretty much rows sit inside of columns, right? So every column can have a collection of rows that lay things out left to right. And then within this column, or excuse me, within this row, you'll notice that there are many options laid out left to right here. This image of me doesn't need to have a column because it's just an image. But say I wanted to have items stacked on top of each other, and this is a very important concept, you would always want to have a column here to stack items on top of each other. So see how this works, right? It's like you have a row to hold this title, another row to hold all of this data, but then inside of that row, there's an option here where somebody wants to have maybe 2 things on top of each other. So you can combine columns and place columns strategically inside of rows to get things to stand on top of each other. And then you don't really need to have columns for these 3 buttons. But if I wanted to be overkill, like you can do this. There's nothing wrong with this. Like there's no one way to build a UI. Some people like using more columns than others. I'm not going to tell you one way is better, but if you are somebody who just likes to organize things with more columns, you totally can. So check this out. Now I have 1 column for each item here, and each of those columns are being laid out horizontally inside of a row. So that's me kind of breaking down a more advanced UI layout here, but I could repeat the same exercise for this right-hand side. Like there are many rows in this, right? So we have 1 row right here, which is laying out the recommendations. And then we have this row that holds a video. And inside of this kind of video list object, we have 1 column here, which is holding the video thumbnail. And then we have another column here, which is laying out text top to bottom. So whenever you need something to be laid out top to bottom, you would use a column, right? And then within this column, we have all of these smaller items here. So I hope now you can see kind of the power of rows and columns. This obviously is a web app that I'm showing you. And this concept pretty much applies to everything. So if we move back to the mobile app here, Cal AI, and many Dreams into Apps builders are building mobile apps, so this might be a little bit more relevant. You'll notice here that mobile apps typically lay elements out from top to bottom. And so this is going to be actually a lot easier of an exercise to do, where I can just simply highlight here, or excuse me, outline everything that's top to bottom. So first, we have a big column. Every app container will have one large kind of parent column. And then within this parent column, we can have many rows. Okay. So the first row that I'm going to draw is going to be the row that holds the progress bar. And then we'll have 1 row that holds the title, another row that holds this. And then we're most likely going to have another row here, but this row is going to be a lot bigger. And when you're working with Flutter, Flutter allows you to set alignment of all the widgets inside of your parent container or your parent layout. So let me break that down a little bit here. If I have a parent layout that say, it's like this could be an entire row. Everything you see right here is a row. I can use Flutter Flutter alignment settings to lay out all the data that's inside of my row, my column, my container. So just to open back up FlutterFlow here, if I say create this row, and this row spans across my app, say I want to align this button to the middle, FlutterFlow has this feature right here called main axis alignment that allows you to adjust where the content inside of that row is placed. And so I can use this main axis alignment feature to do that exact thing. I could use this alignment if I was using a container, which I'll show you more about in a moment. Say I place this button inside of a container, I could use this alignment tool because containers are actually bigger parent objects that allow the content inside of them to span across. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but at least you can see how rows give you this axis alignment feature, and this is what enables you to build like really visually like nice looking apps where you don't really have to think about like how many pixels you want to add padding and margin. You can just kind of rely on the alignment features that Flutter has built in for you here to do all that. So back to our example here, say I wanted to align all this content in the row to the middle. I can do that by using the main axis alignment feature right here in Flutter. So see how everything just moved to the middle of the page? That's because I have my column activated and my column spans the entire page top to bottom. And I can use these Flutter alignment options down here to move everything that's inside of that container. So I want you to play around with these. It kind of just takes some feeling and getting used to understand how they all work. But over time, as you use them, you'll understand how they affect your layout. Space evenly, space around, and space between. These are three really fun alignment tools that you can use to actually automatically add padding or margin in between any item in your container. So you can see how that affects your layout. Awesome, awesome. So now that you know a bit about alignment, we can make this case finally where we have this row here. This row has content in between it. Say this is a container, and we set the alignment of the parent row to be middle, like we did here in FlutterFlow, right? Middle. That brings everything to the middle. And then what we can do is place a bunch of rows inside of it to create our content in the middle. Okay, I'm being very overboard here with the number of rows and columns. I simply want you to understand, just very extremely how they work. You can play around with how many rows and columns you want to use. You do not have to get as extreme as I am. So that's basically how rows and columns work in mobile and web apps. And then throughout your journey building an app, you are going to experiment with layouts. You're never going to get it right the first time. And again, there are infinite number of ways to create layouts. Your job is to create a layout that has even padding, even spacing, and looks visually pleasing without needing to like adjust 5 pixels here, 10 pixels there, 20 pixels here. You want to utilize the built-in alignment features that FlutterFlow has for you. So how do you make your app actually do stuff? Well, in the context of FlutterFlow, this is known as an action. FlutterFlow has a very robust action flow editor that allows developers to perform a series of tasks whenever a user taps something, double taps something, maybe holds and drags something. There are many different ways that you can trigger an action in FlutterFlow. And in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to trigger these actions and navigate the action flow editor. So here on my page, I have a blank screen, and I'm going to show you how to trigger a very basic action so that we can create a very basic hello world. Hello world is a honestly like fundamental, extremely popular first project that is like the most basic computer program that a developer can make. And even before you make a to-do list, hello world is simply the first program that you can make that allows someone to test that their code is working and just prove that they can do it. So let's do a quick hello world app using FlutterFlow and learn how to build actions. Beautiful. So with my new page, all I'm going to do is drag a button here, and please feel free to follow along if you want to get this experience. Now what I'll do is click on the column that my button is inside of and align it into the middle. And then I'll also take the overall parent and align everything inside of it into the middle as well. And if you want to see what I just did there, I clicked on I clicked on the column itself and I aligned this column into the middle. And then with the column also activated, I aligned the main axis alignment to the middle. So if you use the combination of both of these things, you can get your widget to hang out in the middle, both vertically and horizontally. Now I'll click on the button and I'll scroll down to modify the button to say hello. Beautiful. Now, how do I do something when a user clicks on this button? Well, tap on any item that you want to add an action to. And in the top right, in your properties pane, the second option here is called actions. Your actions are where you can do stuff. And FlutterFlow has an action flow editor. So click on open. And this allows you to begin building out a sequence of things that you want to occur. So first we have to select our action trigger. The trigger is what's going to start the action. So the first one we have here is on tap, which is triggered when someone taps the screen once, similar to clicking a mouse. So I'll tap on tap. And here I have no actions yet. So the first one I'll do is click on add an action. And on the right-hand side here, we have a whole collection of different actions that FlutterFlow offers us. The one I care about right now is called alerts, notifications, and we will click on alert dialog. Then I'll tap on informational dialog. This is a small system message that will pop up on the screen, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. However, this dialog allows us to set a title, a message, and a dismiss text. I'm going to say, hello world, my program is working. Okay. Then I will simply exit the action flow editor, and we can now test to see if this app actually works. Make sure you have no bugs here. You should see a blue check mark, and then click on the lightning bolt right here at the top right. This lightning bolt is enabling test mode, and test mode allows you to quickly change things on your app and see how it works. Test mode is really cool because literally within the browser, you can test your app's functionality without needing to like download it to your phone or connect your phone. Those are all things that FlutterFlow does support, but this is what makes app development so fun and easy, is that FlutterFlow allows you just to literally do everything in the browser, and I'm a big fan of that. So if you don't see the lightning bolt here, you can click on the downward facing arrow and click on the lightning bolt test. Like I said, FlutterFlow does have local run support as well, which means you can download the FlutterFlow app for your Mac. You can connect your phone into USB and actually test the app directly on the phone. There are times where that's a lot more handy than just doing it in the browser, but especially for beginners, like the browser should be totally fine. So if you're following along, you should now have a very basic app running. This is the other screen that I had designed. So if I want to change the initial screen that my app opens to, I can click on settings and integrations. Okay. And I can go to app details. And right here, I can set my entry page to actions and navigation. This will essentially tell FlutterFlow what page to open up first whenever somebody opens our app. There are many settings like that you'll learn over time. I'm going to undo dark mode here because it looks like that dark mode was on. Then I'll just click on say hello. And notice what happens. My action is triggered here where it says, hello world, my program is working. So that's essentially a basic demo of how actions work. But the cool thing is you can actually string a lot of actions together. So if I click back on the button and go back to the action flow editor, I can actually do one action after another, after another, after another. And that's what makes this really powerful. There are many types of actions that you can choose from. Actions range from navigation actions where you can go from screen to screen. You can navigate back. You can do database actions like updating documents in Firestore, making an API call, refreshing the database. We're going to get into a lot of these when we work on our sample project at the end of the master course. You can do Supabase, and so pretty much everything that's backend or database related, you can do from right here. We're going to study state management in just a moment, but you can also update the state of your app. You can show really cool interactions like a bottom sheet, a date picker, color picker. You could launch a QR code scanner. You can trigger alerts. Like I said, there's other utilities as well, like setting dark mode settings, copying a piece of text to clipboard, start audio recording, downloading a file. You can share, launch a URL, send an email, send an SMS, trigger an animation, integrations like Stripe, Braintree, Razorpay, RevenueCat, OneSignal. There's so many actions here, and FlutterFlow is constantly adding actions. Another great feature is that you can create your own actions by writing your own Flutter code. This is going to be a lot more advanced for those of you who wish to have kind of custom functionality, but you can definitely do that in Flutter. There's also one more type of action trigger that I want you to know about, triggering an action on page load. This is a really nifty trigger that you can use, and the way to activate it is by going to the widget tree, activating the topmost widget here, which in many cases is like the page or the scaffold at the top. Then go to the action flow editor and open it up. You'll see now there are different action triggers here: on page load, on phone shake, on shortcut press. So you could literally trigger an action if somebody shakes their phone, or you can trigger an action if somebody loads a page as well. So I'm going to do the one on page load. And this is where you can do like interesting actions like, hey, is this person a premium member of my app? If you're trying to build a monetized app, maybe you don't want to show a screen if somebody is not purchased. And say there's some way or a button that you click that would take you to a page. Say once you land on that page, you want to make sure the user is premium. You could do that on page load by doing something called a conditional action. We'll dive deeper into conditionals later, but essentially you could run a check on page load. A check just means like, hey, let's make sure that this piece of data is what I think it is or what I want it to be. Like if a user on their profile had, premium, I could do, hey, is the user premium? If true, then I can let them stay on the page. And if false, I could do a navigation back or a navigation to, and I could kick them off the page. This is just a very basic example of how you can use conditional actions, but I did think it was nifty that FlutterFlow built a on-page load trigger, because this is a trigger that I used a lot as a developer, and you can get pretty creative with how you want to use this. So at this point, you know the basics of actions, how to trigger an action. You can do it on button tap. You can do it on page load. And in the next section here, when we talk about user input, we're going to combine a couple concepts together. We're making great progress. There's just a few more key concepts that we need to cover before we start working on our sample projects. Let's jump in to talk about user inputs. This is where you can actually ask your user to input some data, and you as the app developer can take that data, process it, and do things with it. So today we're going to throw it back to my first ever app that I ever built back when I was 15 years old. I built an app for my football team to calculate our 1 rep max. Your 1 rep max is a mathematical formula that allows you to calculate how much weight you could hypothetically rep out for one. What does that mean? Well, football players like to continue pushing their weight higher and higher. And in order for you to calculate how strong you are, we typically use this 1 rep max value, which is how much weight can you push for 1 full rep. So instead of just stacking a bunch of weight, you typically find a weight that you can't do more than 10 of. Typically, you want to find a weight that you do less than 10 and 10 until failure. And there is a formula out in the world where you can calculate this by taking the weight of the exercise that you did and dividing it by this type of coefficient. So what I did back in high school is I learned Swift for my senior project, and I used Swift to create a 1 rep max app. It took me pretty much like a whole 2 months to figure out how to do that. And I was even meeting with like one of my family friends who worked as an engineer at Apple. So definitely was a little bit of a challenge, but now it's a lot easier. So I'm going to throw it back today, and we're going to build a 1 rep max calculator where you can accept the weight from your user and be able to calculate and tell them how much their hypothetical 1 rep max is. So let's jump in. First, I'm going to create this screen here, and I'm going to type 1 rep max user input, and we'll start building out our layout here. So the first thing is I'm going to say, how much weight did you lift? Okay. I'll move this column to the middle, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. How much weight did you lift? We'll put the font size up to bold. Okay. And then I will grab a text field. And a text field is a form element in Flutter and FlutterFlow that allows users to type stuff into it. So here we have a text field. I'll click on the text field and I will change the hint text from text field to weight. Okay. Weight, and ideally we tell the user in what format we want this weight. So I'm going to say weight parentheses LB, like pounds. Okay. Then what I'll do is I'm going to copy this text and paste it again and say, how many reps did you perform? Okay. And I'll copy this text field, duplicate it, and bring it under. I'll click on this text field and change the label to say reps. I think I missed the hint text. I'll say reps. Gorgeous. Beautiful. One thing I haven't taught you yet is how to name your widgets in FlutterFlow. This is really important because as you start working with the user input, you need to know where the input came from. So click on any one widget. We'll start with this weight widget here. And notice when you click on it, it says text field at the top. Well, text field is the type of widget, but it's actually the default name of the widget here at the top right. So if I zoom in just a bit more, I can actually change this widget name to be a name that represents that widget. So I'm going to call this weight widget. And typically I use the this format where I capitalize the first word and there's no spaces. You're not allowed to do a space in a widget name. So I'll do weight widget with capital W, capital W. And whenever you're creating variables in code or low code or anything, I typically would recommend you use this type of format where you capitalize the first word. That way it's kind of easy to read. So now this label has changed here. So anytime I reference this, and you'll see that in just a moment how this is going to work, you'll know exactly what widget you are working with. So then I'll do the same thing for this reps widget down here. I'll remove it and say reps widget. And now let me show you how this plays out. We need a button for our user to actually click on to calculate the 1 rep max. So I'll drop a button here and I will say calculate. Then I will add 20 units of padding there and 20 units of padding there. So I can create a little bit of you know, some visual space here. So I do 5 and then 5. Cool, this looks a little bit better. Beautiful. So at this point, we have what we need to perform the calculation. So how do we get this user input? Well, let's tap on calculate and then open up the action flow editor and tap on add action. The first thing we want to do is add an info dialog, an information dialog here. And I'm going to show you how to get the input from the page. Anytime you want to dynamically set a variable, so what that means is anytime you want to set a value from something that a user is inputting, you can use this orange item here, this orange icon, and this allows you to use a variety of sources for that piece of data or that information. The alternative is I can actually write out the data that I want to submit to the action. This is called hard coding. But when you build a fancy app or a complex app, you don't want to be hard coding things. You want it to be all dynamic is what we call it. So to make this variable dynamic, you click on the orange icon, and then we will find widget state. And in the next section here, we'll talk about state. But widget state allows you to grab onto widgets and the data associated to those widgets. See here, we have weight widget, reps widget. You remember, we changed the name of our widget to be exactly that. And now you can see why. If I had just kept it text field and text field, we wouldn't know what the input is that the user is giving to us. So by changing the name of the widget, we can now see the data that we want to work with a lot easier. So the first thing I'm going to grab is the weight widget. And then here in message, I'm going to do the reps widget. Now let's go back to our test mode and we will rerun the app to test to see if this actually works. I need to go back to my settings and then change the entry page to user input. We'll come back in just a moment and check to see how this works. Okay, so now that we know how to get the input, the next step is to perform the calculation for the 1 rep max. For us to implement this feature, we need to learn a concept called page state. And this segment's getting a little long, so I'm gonna cut it here and I'll see you in the next. Let's explore an intermediate app development concept called state. In FlutterFlow, we have something called app state and page state. Both of these are types of state. State is a commonly used concept in all of software development. Whether you choose to work with Flutter or a different UI framework like Vue or React or another no-code tool like WeWeb or Zeno or what have you, state is a concept that you need to know that makes you one step closer to thinking like a computer scientist or software developer. So, page state and app state are both just types of state. So I want to first start by explaining to you the definition of state. State is the current memory of your app. It holds all the data that your app needs to know right now, like the user inputs, selections, or results. State changes as users interact with your app. And I'm going to show you an example in just a moment here. Such as when you click buttons or type into a form, you might see things on the page update as you interact with buttons. That is state in action. So think of state as like a whiteboard or a brain where you can write data temporarily. It stays there, it's written, and only until you erase it yourself, it will stay there. So you can write, update, and erase data in like a mini brain or like a mini memory store in your app. So think of it as like a really quick and easy memory that you can use to keep track of things. So let me show you a real brief example using an app called DoorDash, a food delivery app. All right, so here I have DoorDash and I want to show you page state in action or state in action. So I'll click on any random restaurant here and we will just grab any one thing like cheese sticks. Check this out. Here I have the cheese sticks modal where I can shop for cheese sticks. And if I click on this button right here to increase the quantity, notice that the price goes up every time I click it. That is state. State is like that mini memory that only exists on this specific pop-up. And as I interact with this, I'm actually updating my page state to reflect the total price. So the price of this is probably something like $10.60. So every time I click on this plus sign, it's actually updating my page state or the state of this pop-up to reflect here the price. So state is what makes apps, come to life. This isn't like a database. Like this isn't like a server database connection that's being made here. This is actually part of your browser or the memory on your computer. Like you might have heard of the word RAM, right? Well, this is actually you reading and writing to the RAM without you knowing it. Similarly on your phone, when you're interacting with DoorDash and seeing this type of interaction or this type of update, you're also reading and writing to your phone's RAM. So this is very powerful. And this is why you probably noticed that over time, computers have more and more and more RAM because software on the computers are getting very complex. So as you have more complex software, you need more RAM or more storage in your random access memory, which is what RAM stands for, to create these types of complex apps. Cool. So you've seen a really basic example. If I click on add to cart here, we can see even more how state is involved. So I'll click on the cart and notice here if I hit on continue, right? Same thing. Like I can adjust the tip here, and as I click on different tips, the data on the page is being updated. So this is me interacting with the page state. The developer of this must have been like, hey, whenever somebody clicks on a different tip, update the state of this page to add that tip value to the total of the order, right? So that's page state in action. Let's go back to our page. All right, so now we've talked about state, right? State is the brain or memory of your app. It's what keeps track of data as it changes over time. Just like your brain remembers things, sometimes you refer to it as like your short-term memory, right? State is like your short-term memory. You have short-term memory where you can remember things very quickly. Then you have long-term memory. And if you want to get into the computer science or computer engineering fundamentals, state is interacting with RAM, and then things like the database, like pieces of data that you need to remember for a long period of time, that's the same thing as like your storage or your hard drive. So we have short-term memory, which is state and RAM, and then we have like long-term memory, which you can store in a database, and the contents of the database is being stored in a hard drive or solid state drive, typically known as like long-term storage, right? So cool. I've given you an example here, like the whiteboard at the gym. So imagine you're at a gym and there's a whiteboard next to you. At first, the whiteboard is blank, there's no data, no memory. But as you work out, you write the weight that you lifted, your reps completed, and your calculated 1 rep max. The whiteboard is now holding some state because you have some data on it. So it's like the gym's short-term memory storing all the data you've given it. But once you leave the gym and you come back the next day, it's very likely that that whiteboard is going to be empty, okay? So here's some key concepts that you need to understand. State is not fixed. It's not long-term storage. It changes as you interact with the app. It's short-term storage, okay? But it's used to kind of manipulate and interact with the screen primarily in a very quick manner, just like you saw me in with the DoorDash app. If you lift a heavier weight or do more reps, you're going to erase the old numbers and write down new ones, okay? So you can never have state like have many values. You have to always have one value on the state. So you can only have one drawing on the whiteboard or one equation on the whiteboard. You can't have more than one. And the whiteboard or state will always reflect the current data. Notice when I was using DoorDash, if I clicked on a different tip option, everything on the page would change. Like I didn't have 550 and 750 for the tips activated at the same time. Anytime I clicked one, it would update everything. Okay. So this is state in action. It's always tracking the current status of your app in the current moment in time. Okay. So that's super important to understand. Now we can move over to page state. Okay. So page state, the only part I really want you to capture here is page state only exists when you're on a specific page. So it's like a mini memory or mini brain on a specific page. So when you leave the page or you refresh that page, the data is cleared. Page state should only be used for short-term memory. It's temporary and specific to what's happening on the page that you're looking at right now. For example, on DoorDash, if I were to click on 8 cheese sticks and I refresh the page, it would completely forget that I clicked on 8 cheese sticks and it would start me from 1. There are times in your app where you might want that data to stay there, and we can talk about how you can use long-term storage like databases later in the program here. But what you need to know in the context of state is that state's very temporary and only used to keep track of things for a short period of time. And page state is only scoped. Okay, so there's a new word here, scoped. The page state is only scoped to the current page that you're on. And the word scope, like think about like a scope on a telescope or binoculars or like a rifle or something. Like the scope is the focus area in which that this concept applies to. So our scope is the current page that we're on right now, okay? So the data will only be stored in a temporary fashion for the page that I'm on right now, okay? So let me walk you through a quick data flow example as if you were building a shopping cart app, okay? So imagine you have a cookie store and your user adds a certain type of cookie to the cart. They have a list of cookies that they can choose from and they select a cookie. So user adds a cookie to the cart and then they say, hey, I want 3 cookies. Well, you, the developer, are now going to have to calculate the total cost by getting the cost of the cookie, multiply it by the quantity, and that's going to be equal to the total. When you want to display this total on the page, we need to take advantage of page state. So we're going to run this calculation as soon as the user updates the cookie count, like say they click on a plus sign. Okay, so as soon as the plus or the minus sign is clicked, we will run this calculation and then we're going to update page state. So anytime that a plus or minus is hit, we're going to erase whatever's on the page state whiteboard and we're going to add something new to it, right? So that's where the concept of the page state brain comes in, where we are going to have a variable here. This variable is going to be called total, okay? And we can define this in FlutterFlow. We can say, hey, keep track of a variable called total in state, in page state, and I'm going to update you whenever I need to. So we have total, and it's of type number. You learned about data types earlier in this masterclass. So you have total number, and then we're going to update this value whenever that user clicks on plus or minus. So this is our mini brain that we're using to keep track of the total. And just for sake of illustration here, I kind of created this basic user interface sketch where you're going to have a cart. It's going to show all the contents of your cart, the price, and then whenever a user clicks, plus or minus here, right? If a user clicks on plus or minus, this number will go down and we will update the page state. But also, one thing that I forgot to mention is that even this value here, the quantity value, is going to have to be kept track of in page state too, because if a user clicks on minus, this quantity will decrease by 1. But how does the page know to decrease it by 1? Well, that's where state comes in. We need to make sure that we save it in state. So I'm going to have to add another thing here, another variable here in the page state definition that says, hey, page state, keep track of 2 variables for me, the total and then the quantity on the page. So this is all we would need. I'm going to take this one step further and teach you about a concept here that actually ties all this together. So how do you get this data to show up on the page? Well, this is a concept called data binding, and we haven't quite gotten here yet in the program, but I will, and I wanted to introduce it to you now. Data binding is the concept of taking a piece of data from anywhere, whether it's page state or app state or from a database, anywhere, and showing it on the page. That's the beauty of software development. And once I show you how to do this in FlutterFlow, it's going to blow your mind because this is where the interaction comes in. Taking data, manipulating it in state or memory or a database, and then showing it on the page, that's the root of application development. And once you conquer that, you'll know everything here. So data binding is the concept of taking a piece of data and mapping it or putting it on a page and having it update. So in FlutterFlow, we can also tell FlutterFlow, hey, this number right here, 30, well, I want you to pull it from, a piece of data. I want you to bind it to a piece of data. And the way that you do that is you can set where this data comes from. And we can say something like page state, and then this isn't the actual code, but I just want to prove like the idea here. We can say page state total. So right here, instead of me hard coding that 30, I can just say, hey, pull this number from page state total. So this number right here is going to be pulled from this, okay? And similarly, you guessed it, we're going to pull this quantity from this quantity number here too. That's high level how you get the point here. I'm going to just kind of keep it like that. We'll say quantity, but then I kind of gotta move this over here. So this is actually interesting because now you're seeing from an illustration how software development works. In the next section here, we're going to jump into FlutterFlow, and I'm going to show you exactly how we do this with our 1rep max calculator. Before we get into that, we need to talk about app state. If you're understanding this concept of page state, app state is going to be very easy to understand too. App state is the global memory of your app. So it stores data that needs to be shared and accessed across every single page or component of your app. So unlike page state, which only affects a single screen, app state holds information that stays consistent throughout the entire app. So this is a higher scoped type of memory. You can use page state to quickly store interactions like a quantity selector or an input field or anything that has anything that needs to be kind of combined with a couple others to perform some sort of calculation. Okay, so page state you can use in those small scenarios, but you can use app state for scenarios where, hey, is the user logged in? Is this a premium or a free user? What's the current balance on this user's account? Right? At Prize Picks, for example, we are a daily fantasy sports app, and we needed to keep track of how much wallet balance that the player had on their account. and we showed the wallet balance in the top right of the page wherever a user went. In fact, let's just go over there. So here's my PrizePicks account. And just like I was telling you, look, at the top right, I have my account balance, $2,200 something. No matter where I go on this website, that 2,200 is always there. Okay, so that is app state. I remember because I actually programmed this as well. No matter where I go, and if I refresh this page, it will always be there as that same value. And even if I click on something like, deposit, it will be there all the time. So on PrizePicks, here's a perfect example of page state actually. If I click on any one of these selections here, check this out. So I'm building a lineup, but this lineup only exists on this page. If I click on my lineups and then I go back to board, well, they actually have it hooked up to app state. So they're smart because they want people to keep their lineup here. However, in another scenario, it could be that when you go to my lineups and board, this would clear out. That would mean that the developer used page state to only keep track of this data on the page. But it's obvious here that when I go to other pages and I come back, this data still exists. That's because they used app state. However, if I refresh the page, this data does not exist. So app state and page state, no matter, which one you use, it's still temporary. Unless you store that information in like your browser cookies, which is possible with FlutterFlow. I'm not going to get into that right now. Or you use a database to hold your data. If you refresh the page, that data is not going to be there. The data would be there if you use the database. So that's a cool like mental test that you can take to yourself. Like, hey, do I need this data to still exist if, the user refreshes the page? If the answer is yes, I want the data to exist when the user refreshes the page, well, then you can look into storing the data in a database. But if it's just for UI interaction purposes, or it's to complete a user journey like this one at PrizePicks where I have to, select a couple options and then finish submitting a lineup, well, you could probably use app state or page state. And I think it's actually very smart that PrizePicks did app state here, because that would increase their conversion rate of people who finish completing an entry and then actually submitting that entry. So let's go back to FigJam. So cool. Unlike page state, which only affects a single screen, app state holds information that stays consistent throughout the entire app. Like a logged in user's details, for example, like the account balance, or app-wide settings. Think of it as a shared whiteboard that every page in your app can read and write to. So at this point, you should know the difference between page state and app state. Both of them are at the root the same in that they are temporary stores of data that get deleted when you refresh the page. It's just that page state is only scoped to the page, or it's only available on the page, and app state is available throughout all the pages. It's scoped to the app, but when you refresh the page or you kill the app and open it again, it will be gone. However, this is the start of you becoming a magician, because app state and page state is where the magic happens. All right, so let's finish up the functionality for our 1rep max calculator by tying the knot on page state. I'm gonna go ahead and spin up a test mode simulator just to get this going, but we can get going on implementing the functionality. So just like that example I gave to you a moment ago with the shopping cart, essentially every time a user hits this calculate button, we're going to run the calculation to calculate the 1rep max, and then we are going to update page state to update a value on the page. So first, let's create that value. I'm going to add a piece of text right here. We will then create some padding at the top. We'll add 100 pixels of padding here. I'll make this text very big, so we'll say like 48. And essentially here, we're going to say 1 rep, or essentially we're going to say two things. I'm going to duplicate this. We'll get rid of the padding here. I'll make this one a lot smaller. Just some basic design. And we're going to say 1 rep max. And then imagine it says 250 pounds, right? So essentially when a user hits calculate, we are going to update this value. But the first thing we need to do is tell the page that we have some state that it needs to keep track of. So how do you do that? Well, heading over to your widget tree and activating the page widget here at the top, or the scaffold widget, you will notice at the right-hand side here in your properties pane, it says state management. Here we have local page state variables. This is where you can define all the variables or types of data that you want your page to keep track of. So we want this to keep track of one value in particular, and we're going to call this 1 rep max. We're going to set this to a double because this number might have decimals. We'll say it's nullable. Nullable means, can it be empty or not? My answer is yes, it can be empty. And for the initial value, this is essentially you saying like, hey, I want this to be the default initial or first value when a page loads. So for example, if you're building like a page state variable for quantity selection, you might want to set this default to 1 because anytime a user loads that product, you might want to default them to 1 product quantity. Okay, so cool. Now I'll hit confirm. And there's also an option here for is list. So if you ever wanted to save like a list of doubles or a list of strings or a list of numbers, you can do that as well. So now my page is ready for me to interact with this state variable. So I'm going to make sure my test mode is working. The biggest thing here is like learning how to key off the page state. So for example, when a user loads this page, I don't want to show this 1 rep max and 250 pounds, right? I only want to show it if somebody has clicked on calculate. So here we can use a concept called conditional visibility, and let me show you how to use that. So with this text activated, we can go to the right side pane, hit visibility, and there's an option here called conditional. This is us saying, hey, I only want this widget to be seen if something exists or if something is true. As you know, in this masterclass, I taught you that computers can understand comparisons really well. So by activating this conditional, we can set a comparison that FlutterFlow will check for to evaluate whether it's true or false. And if it's true, it will show the widget. And if it's false, it won't. So here I'm going to say conditionals. I'm going to set this to a condition, single condition. I'll tap on the first value and say, hey, first value. Notice here it now says page state because we activated page state. I can say, hey, check the page state 1 rep max, okay, and see if it is set. If it is set, then this evaluation would be true. However, I only want to show this 1 rep max if it's not set because that means that somebody hasn't clicked on the button yet. So we'll say is not set. Okay, similarly here, I'm going to activate conditional, and I'm going to say page state 1 rep max is not set. And I don't think yep, there we go. So what this means is that if 1 rep max is not set, that means the condition will be true. Excuse me. I messed this up. We need to set this to if 1 rep max is set. Because if 1 rep max is set, then the evaluation is true, and true means to show the widget on the page. Sorry about that brain fart there. So if first value is set, then show 1 rep max. And similarly here, we want to say condition, single condition, if 1 rep max is set, then we show this. We can do another one here just to prove you the idea. Like we can do another label here that says something like, here, we'll set this to 0. We can do another label here that says no 1 rep max calculated. So this label we can show if it's not set, right? That means that we have not yet calculated a 1 rep max. Okay, so let's test this out. We'll go back to test mode. We'll hit instant reload. And we'll give this a shot. Okay. One more time. Sometimes you got to hit it a couple times before it actually gets your changes. There we go. Now it detected some changes. There you go. So no one rep max calculated, which means that since the state is empty, it is not set. Therefore, this is true and it's showing on the page. So now we can work on the calculation when somebody hits calculate. So check this out. When someone clicks on this button, we're going to go to the action flow editor. We're going to open this up. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this alert dialog. Instead, I'm going to add an action that says update. And here you'll see update page state under state management. Now I can say set fields, and look, it has my 1 rep max here. So I can click on that 1 rep max double, look, and I can do exactly what I was teaching you about, right? You can either set it or reset it. And the cool feature that FlutterFlow built for you is also this increment and decrement feature. Increment means add 1, decrement means subtract 1. So if you're building a quantity selector, you can use the increment and decrement feature to just quickly add or subtract 1. But I'm going to use set value here, and I'm just going to say 999 to see if this works. There's another option down here called update type. Update type is cool because anytime you update the page state, you can set the page to essentially do a little mini refresh, or they call it a rebuild, where if there are any other places where data binding exists, where you've binded the value of a widget to a piece of data, you can set this update type to rebuild current page, and that's actually going to do a mini refresh and update all the other pieces of data too. You could hit no rebuild, and that's only going to update this piece of data, like only whatever's tied to this specific page state that I'm updating, the 1 rep max. But most likely you're going to want to do rebuild current page. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where data on your page is not updating and you are using page state to interact with the state, you may want to check this update type feature to ensure that your state, or excuse me, that your page is rebuilding the right way. I've seen it many times where builders will report a bug in their app saying that like the data is not updating correctly, and normally that's because their update type in their update page state action is not set correctly. Okay. So we'll hit rebuild current page. Now I'll close this out and we are going to test the app. And the functionality that I'm looking for here is, does the app update this text right here to the text that is supposed to show when the page state is set? So we'll just put any value here, hit calculate, and boom, that worked. So essentially, my logic here for the conditional visibility is working, and the page state variable is getting successfully set. However, now we need to actually run the calculation for what a user is inputting. So real quick, I am going to identify the calculation for 1 rep max, and I'll be cool. So from a quick Google search, I see that there are a few different formulas. I'm going to use the Brisky formula. I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is weight divided by this value. Okay, so let's do this. So essentially it's weight divided by 1.0278 minus 0.0278 times reps. Okay, so we'll go back to FlutterFlow, and here, value to set, I'm going to click on the orange icon, and here we're going to do code expression. Okay, I'm going to add an argument. This argument, we'll get into code expressions shortly, but this argument is essentially me passing in some input into a function. Okay, I'm going to say this is going to be the weight. It's going to be a double. The value is going to be the widget state, and we are going to get the weight widget input value and hit confirm. Oops, sorry. Yep, that. Then we're going to add another argument, and we're going to call this reps. Okay, we're going to say that this is a double as well because there might be decimals, and we'll set this to widget state reps. Beautiful. We'll check for errors real quick. Won't let us here. return type is definitely going to be a double. Okay, I'm just going to type 1 to see. Okay, cool. So now we're going to run the formula, okay? We're going to say weight divided by, so we'll say weight divided by, I'm just going to copy this. And then reps actually already looks good here. Cool. We'll check for errors. No errors. Beautiful. So essentially, the reason that this weight word works here and the reps word works here is because that is the name of the variable that I have set up here as well. Okay. So we'll hit confirm. All right. And now what I'll do is I'm going to pull this text and I'm going to say bind this to combine text. We're going to say the first piece of text that I want to reference is the page state, 1 rep max. Confirm. Then I'm going to add text. I'm going to type in a space with my keyboard. So I just hit the space bar because if I don't, then it's going to have the number and then the next piece of text right next to it. So I'm going to put space LBS and I'm going to hit confirm. Okay. This is me kind of on a whim. Let's see if we get it right. I'm not too concerned, but you never know with software development. Okay, cool. I'm going to hit instant reload one more time just to make sure that it got my changes. How much weight did you lift? 165 for 10 reps. Calculate. Nice, it worked. It calculated my 1 rep max and outputted it right here. However, there are a lot of decimals here, right? So what I could do is I'm actually just going to limit this text by using the max characters allowed. I'm just going to type probably 7. That should be plenty. I don't think we'll be pushing like thousands and thousands of pounds, and I don't think the decimal precision really matters for a bodybuilder, so we'll just kind of move on. Beautiful. So I'll say 225, repped it for 12. Calculate, boom, 1 rep max, 324.114. And I'll just add 10 pixels of padding top, maybe 20 actually, just to make this look nice. Sweet, so we successfully learned about page state. Now let's round this out by learning about app state. So just like page state, app state is temporary data that you can read and write. The main difference is that app state is available throughout all pages of your app. So I gave you a bunch of examples. So in this quick session, I'm going to show you how to use app state. So in this third tab right here, on the left side pane, you're going to see app values. Here we can define what variables we want our app to be ready to store in app state. So you can tap on add app state variable here. And a really basic one that I'm going to do is called calculator title. And the type of data is going to be string. And I'm going to set this to 1 rep max calculator. So essentially, this is me telling my app what data is going to be written and read from. And here on my page, we will bind this data by clicking on the text, updating where the text is sourced from by tapping on app state, and you're going to see here calculator title. So this title will now be pulled from app state. And if I hit instant reload on my test mode simulator here, you're going to see that that name is being pulled directly from app state. Similarly, if you want to update app state, you can go to any action flow editor, add an action, and if you type app state, you'll see here there is an action for update app state. So the same exact way that you updated page state, you can update app state, and that will be available across all of your other pages. Cool. Now I want to talk to you about databases. If you've made it this far, I want you to give yourself a pat on the back because what you've just accomplished is extremely impressive. And even if you're understanding 50% of this stuff, you should be very proud because you're at the cusp of becoming a full stack app developer. And I'm sure with enough repetition, and if you rewind this entire lesson and follow along, you will be able to build this type of app. And like I said, I spent an entire semester trying to build a 1-rep max calculator. So for you to be able to do it and understand all the fundamentals of full stack app development is extremely, extremely impressive. So let's keep moving. Now I want to talk to you about how to implement the database. And before we do that, we need to understand a concept called CRUD. Not that kind of CRUD, CRUD as in database CRUD. And let me open up FigJam so I can show you what I mean. So all databases have 4 main operations, and you use the term CRUD to describe those operations, which stands for create, read, update, and delete. When you are working with the database, these are the only 4 things that you can do. You can create a record in your database, you can read record or records, you can update things in the database, and you can delete things in the database. So in this lesson, to finish off our master course, we are going to create a workout tracker. It's like a to-do list, but it's a workout tracker. So how do we do that? Well, we need to create records in a database. And when you think about a database, I just want you to think about literally like a Google spreadsheet, right? Like it's just a sheet of data, okay? So when we are creating a record in our database for our workout tracker, what are some of those fields that, we are going to have? And say this app is going to be a tracker where we load in a workout and then we have to mark when it's done. Okay, so let's call this a workout to-do list rather than a workout tracker. Well, if you think about the, say, columns in a Google Sheet, what are the column names going to be? Well, we're going to have workout name. We're going to have, pretty much that's it, workout name, and then is the workout done? Is done. Okay. And is done is going to be a Boolean because Boolean is true or false. And once we mark the workout as done, it's going to be true or false. That's pretty much it. And then we'll say date completed. Okay. So that's a really basic workout tracking app, right? Like this is the definition of a workout. And I'm not going to overcomplicate it too much, but like the definition of a workout in our database is just this, like what's the name of the workout? Is the workout done? And when was the workout complete? Database design is an entire course in college. And as much as I want to fit it all into this program, I highly encourage you, if you want to learn more about databases, to Google things like object-oriented data, object-oriented design. You can look up something called entity relationship design or modeling. How to design a database. I have an entire program inside of Dreams into Apps on like how to design database, object-oriented design, and the others. But if you want to learn more about it, go ahead and search for those things. But essentially what we just did is we created an object, or we created a collection in our database. And in Firebase, we have a concept called collections. And a collection in Firebase, I actually think I have, no, I don't have the definition here. But a collection in Firebase is essentially a bucket of, or excuse me, a collection in Firebase, in Firestore rather. If you made it this far in the lesson, it means that you're comfortable navigating the front end of FlutterFlow, and now we're going to talk about the back end. FlutterFlow integrates with 2 backends, Firebase and Supabase, but it works way better with Firebase, and let me tell you why. Well, Flutter is an application programming framework that was built and maintained by Google, and Firebase is actually a backend as a service that is powered by Google as well. So since both technologies were built and maintained by Google, they actually built SDKs, or essentially what that means are integrations with each other natively. So Flutter, since it's powered by Google, integrates really well with Firebase because Google developers typically like to use code that they can reuse, that shares the same naming conventions and stuff like that. So Flutter and Firebase are a perfect match made in heaven, and that's why FlutterFlow integrates so beautifully with Firebase. However, you can integrate another backend like Supabase. We're not going to go into that in this tutorial because it is more advanced and requires some intermediate knowledge of application development. You can definitely learn it if you put your mind to it, but Flutter and Firebase are a match made in heaven, so we're going to focus on that. However, in order to understand how Flutter and Firebase work together, I want to go over some basic application architecture. Cool. So when you are building an app in FlutterFlow, you are building a Flutter-based application, which means as you drag, drop, point, and click, you're actually outputting real Flutter code. That Flutter code represents the UI of your app, the user interface, what users are tapping, touching, pointing, and clicking, right? So what you see here is a Flutter-based app. You learned a bit about app state in the session previous to this, where app state allows you to create mini interactions that store information in the RAM of the phone or the computer, right? In the quick memory. However, if you want to create like real applications, you need to store data in a database for more long-term memory storage. So how do you do that? Okay, well, Firebase integrates directly with Flutter, and Firebase will handle your authentication, your user management, your database, and actually other things as well, like storage and push notifications. Okay, so authentication we're going to cover in the session right after this, but essentially authentication is just a fancy word for your sign in and sign up system. So the system that handles, emails, passwords, and people creating their own accounts. Firebase will handle all that for you. Previously, you had to code all this by hand, and it was quite a nightmare to manage like session keys and tokens and all this crazy stuff. But now Firebase does all of that for you. So that being said, FlutterFlow and Firebase talk directly to each other. So you can push and pull data to the database. You can send images and videos directly to Firebase. You can send push notifications and keep track of all your users directly between your Flutter app and Firebase. So you can pretty much send commands from your Flutter app to Firebase, like read me a piece of data, write a piece of data, and we're going to get into that shortly. But what this is called is a coupled or tightly coupled integration, where Firebase and FlutterFlow actually are very tightly integrated together. You're just reading and writing data, and they're actually talking directly to each other. This is good for reading and writing data, quickly signing up user accounts, and doing basic CRUD operations. We're going to talk about CRUD in the next segment as well. But essentially what you need to know to move forward is FlutterFlow and Firebase are tightly coupled together. Some of y'all are building applications that require APIs or integrations with other services. Say you're building an AI-powered app. You're building an app that integrates with a data provider. You want to automate a task. You want to integrate with like an Amazon API. We have so many different types of builders inside of Dreams into Apps, and I've seen so many different types of APIs. Many builders know that they will want to integrate an API if they're building an app that requires data from somewhere else. Usually what happens is your application will read and write data that belongs to it, and you can do that very beautifully with the FlutterFlow and Firebase integration. However, when you want to integrate with third parties like weather, for example, we have somebody building a farming automation app for their farm. They want to keep track of their farm phases, and then they want to pull the weather API to do some predictions around like what they should do with their farm. Well, they would actually integrate an API for the weather and bring that data into their app. So what you can do there is say I want to read the weather and insert that weather into the database. FlutterFlow can talk to custom APIs using REST API requests. Okay, this is a concept we'll get into more at the end of the program today, but REST API requests allow you to connect to external data providers, and you can use technology like BuildShip. BuildShip is a whole separate no-code tool that I love to use to build my own backends. So if I'm to build my own APIs. If I want to create custom integrations, I want to do automations or workflows, I'll actually head over to a tool called BuildShip and create those automations there and then connect my FlutterFlow app to BuildShip. I will get into BuildShip later, but from a high-level standpoint, your FlutterFlow app can connect to any API or a custom API that you build in a tool like BuildShip, and then BuildShip can actually connect to your database as well. And notice that it says Firebase. So you can actually create a decoupled app, unlike this tightly coupled app, by actually doing some logic on the front end, like reading and writing some basic data, doing some basic authentication. But then when you want to get more complicated, you will want to decouple that. So decouple means separate. You'll want to separate that logic and build that logic out in their own separate APIs, okay? And what you do is you connect your front end to those APIs. Your APIs will then call another API. And I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not. You have one main API that's your connection point, and that connection point is what's talking to all the other data sources, handling that information and sending it back to your front end. It's actually quite an easy pattern to understand as you start building yourself. So notice here, I can connect external services or third-party APIs, and I can read and write data to my database from our custom APIs that we build in BuildShip. So from a high-level standpoint, this is our application architecture. And maybe I want to give you a different example here. Like say you're building a caption generator for YouTube videos. Well, here's an example app architecture of how that would work. Say you have a front-end FlutterFlow app, and the front end accepts the YouTube video link and the type of content that you want to create. Then we can create a custom BuildShip API that takes in the video link and the type of content that the user wants to generate. It will then do a couple things. First, it will find the video on YouTube using the YouTube API. It will send the caption of that YouTube video to ChatGPT. ChatGPT will then take the transcript or of the YouTube video, and this should say transcript, not caption. ChatGPT will then take the transcript of that video, generate whatever content type the front end wanted it to generate. Like say the front end said to generate blogs, like a blog post. You can tell ChatGPT, hey ChatGPT, take the transcript of this video, generate me a blog post. You can call the ChatGPT API from your custom API. Your custom API will get that response from ChatGPT and then send it back to the front end. So that's an example workflow of how we could build an app that takes YouTube videos and then outputs blog posts, okay? So enough architecture. I think we get the point. Let's jump in and let me introduce you to Firebase and how you actually integrate it with. All right, so here I have open my FlutterFlow app, and in another tab, I have firebase.google.com. I highly encourage you to go to firebase.google.com and kind of scroll through, read all the documentation, read the landing page, so you know more about what Firebase is and how it actually works with other technologies outside of FlutterFlow. I think the more that you can expose yourself to Firebase and everything that it has to offer, the better off you're going to be. So let's jump into FlutterFlow and actually connect a new Firebase project. So opening up FlutterFlow, we'll tap on the gear icon here, and I'll click on Firebase. Here, we can use the Firebase setup wizard, but I'm actually going to show you how to do it from scratch because I prefer you know how to do it from scratch, because if anything goes wrong in the automated process they have here, you'll at least know how to fix it. So instead of doing the create project for you flow, we're going to open up Firebase, go to the console, okay? Then we'll create a new project. I'm going to call this, let's say FlutterFlow Master Course, okay? And we'll select our main resource. We can enable, or let's keep Google Analytics off for the project and then hit create. So essentially what we're doing is setting up a project at Google Firebase. And what you need to know, here's a mental model that you absolutely need to know as this is loading. FlutterFlow and Firebase are two separate applications. They're two separate platforms. FlutterFlow doesn't magically connect to Firebase. FlutterFlow is actually just writing some code in Flutter that integrates Firebase. They're not like glued together, or they're not like completely in sync inside like the platform. All FlutterFlow is doing is writing the code for you that integrates Firebase. And you need to understand that model, because when things go wrong in FlutterFlow, sometimes it's not FlutterFlow's fault. It's Firebase as well. And this is where the concept of understanding like the decoupled nature of these platforms really starts to take shape. FlutterFlow and Firebase are two separate platforms, but FlutterFlow makes it easy for them to integrate with each other. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating the project at Firebase, and then what we're going to do is manually integrate it into FlutterFlow. So you'll tap on the gear icon, hit project settings, then we'll take the project ID, come back to FlutterFlow, we'll paste the project ID and hit connect, and we're likely going to get this error that says, FlutterFlow does not have access to this Firebase account. Please add Firebase at flutterflow.io as an editor. So we'll copy this email. We'll head back to Firebase. We're going to hit users and permissions, add the member, paste this, and we'll set this to editor and hit add member. Now, what we just did was we gave FlutterFlow access to our Firebase account using the user system. So now I can hit connect, and that should actually give FlutterFlow the permission to talk to Firebase. So now we've successfully connected Firebase. The next thing to do is hit generate config files and just tap on generate files. This is writing a file in your Flutter code that has all the information about your Firebase setup. Like I said, FlutterFlow is just generating the code. So if anything ever goes wrong, it's important that you come back to this Firebase settings tab and regenerate the files, because that could be the solution to a lot of your problems. Okay, so now we've integrated Firebase, and the next step here is Firebase storage. You can tap on deploy, and this may give us an error. It may not. But essentially, Firebase storage here allows your users to upload photos, videos, files, and essentially it's like your cloud storage. It's like a hard drive that you're renting from Firebase to store images, music, files, videos, anything that you want your users to upload. It needs to be saved somewhere, right? So you're essentially renting some space from Firebase's hard drives, and you're actually letting them save it there. Firebase storage is not currently enabled. Please go to the storage tab in your Firebase project. So what we need to do is go back to Firebase, hit project overview, go to build storage. And this is really common. We need to enable all of these features. So it does look like storage wants me to upgrade my project's billing plan. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The thing is that it's going to ask you for your credit card, but look, I'm just going to put a $1 budget and hit continue. Firebase has a very generous free plan. So even if you put your credit card in, you're not going to get billed. And I have dozens and dozens of apps on here, as you can see, and I never get billed for Firebase. So I don't want you to worry about getting billed. Just pop your credit card in there and hit a $1 budget. You'll be just fine. So now storage is enabled. We'll hit get started, then hit continue. I'm going to say start in test mode. We'll talk about security rules in a moment here too. Error creating bucket. Wonder why. Hope that doesn't give me an error this time. I think that's working. But while we're here, production mode and test mode, the main difference is the security rules. Production mode is going to make it so that not everybody can send data to your storage bucket. Test mode is going to make it much more open security rules for people to store data in your bucket. And I'll tell you why this is important in just a moment here. Let me just figure out why this isn't going through. And I like to keep, these bugs. I like to show you when I'm battling through these bugs, because as a developer, you will encounter issues. Not everything's going to work perfectly every single time. And it's important to understand how other people would solve those problems. So that errored out for a second, as you could see. Try again, and it seems like it would work. And that's just the nature of the game sometimes. So beautiful. Now our storage bucket is enabled, and I'm going to do this a couple more times for other things. We're going to click on Authentication under the Build tab. Doesn't look like that's working, so I'm going to refresh the page. Hit Authentication, and you're going to have to enable this as well here by hitting Get Started. So what we're doing is we're going through all of these different solutions that Firebase has, like these different sub-products. We're actually enabling them so that FlutterFlow doesn't get confused, and it knows that these are on. So we'll hit Firestore database as well. I'll hit create database. We'll just set default for everything. Start in test mode. Cool. So test mode, like I said, you are essentially opening up your database to anybody who wants to read and write data to your database. And this can be very sketchy if you have launched your app and your database is still in test mode. I highly recommend before you launch your app and you put it out into the public that you come back here to rules. And I'm going to explain to you a bit about rules in a moment. And you lock your rules down so that not any just random person can write to your database. I've been in instances at other companies where hackers will find your database connection string, and that's bad. If they find your connection string and your security rules are wide open, hackers can just slam your database and just like pretty much write an infinite number of data until your database maxes out. Beautiful. So now Firebase storage is deployed. We're good to go. And that's pretty much it as far as like setting up Firebase goes. The first thing I want to teach everybody is, how we can use Firebase to read and write data into the database. Sweet. So now that you've successfully integrated Firebase, I want to teach you how to implement authentication, which is your sign up and sign in system. Okay, so I'm going to delete this page because it wasn't here before I started. Then I'm going to click on add new page, and FlutterFlow has this sign up page that I really like called Auth2. So I'm going to click on this, my theme. We're going to say authentication. Hit create page. This will allow us to create account and log in. They've created this really beautiful tab view for us. I'm going to delete what's on the bottom here because I'm not integrating social sign-in right now. Maybe we will in the future, but for right now I want to keep things simple. And I'm going to change brand.ai to workout tracker or workout AI. Okay, beautiful. Now when a user hits get started, we're going to head over to the action flow editor, hit open. And you're going to see that auth provider is unset. And that's because we actually forgot to do something here. If you look at the top right on any part of FlutterFlow, you're going to see this issues tracker. And this issues tracker allows you to find any bugs in your platform. So as you're working through the app and building features, sometimes the code will have issues as the code is being written. These are called errors. And so even when you're handwriting code, you're going to see this. And it's really important that whenever you see these errors, you try to solve them as fast as possible, because if you let these errors stack up, you're not going to know when that error occurred or what you did to create that error in the first place. So my rule of thumb is if you ever get to 3 errors, stop what you're doing and fix them. So the first error I have here is auth setup. Auth action requires authentication to be enabled for the project. So what that means, it's a fancy way of saying I didn't go into the FlutterFlow settings, tap on authentication, and then turn on authentication. So that's really important, right? If we want FlutterFlow to know that we are using the Firebase authentication service, we have to enable authentication, okay? Then we can say authentication type Firebase since we're enabling Firebase. Initial page, this is an important setting. The entry page is the page that your users will go to if they are not logged in. So right here, no page selected. I'm going to change this to authentication because this is the page that a user is going to land if they're not logged in. And if they're not logged in, we want them to log in. So we will send them to the authentication page so that they can either create an account or log in. Sorry if that sounds like I'm being robotic, but that's just the way it is. And I teach this so many times that it's like a script in my head now. Okay. Logged in page, very straightforward. This is the page that you will take a user to if they are logged in. And I'm going to name this user input because that was the name of the page for my 1rep max. And I'll actually come back here and change this to 1rep max page so that we know what page we're talking about. So my logged in page will be 1rep max. Okay. And if I wanted to do sign in with Facebook or sign in with Google, they give you some instructions right here as to how you would do that. So if you wanted to go through that, you can see the docs here. They're pretty straightforward. So beautiful. Notice something. As soon as I did that, all of my bugs went away. So I love solving bugs. That's always good. Beautiful. So now you have authentication enabled. We can go back to authentication here, hit the get started button, open the action flow editor, and you're going to see that we have auth provider email now, and the email field is mapped to the email field. Password field is mapped to password. And I have a feeling that this won't work because we don't have a confirmed password, but I'm going to leave that alone. Okay. Then log in. I'm going to make sure when I click the sign in button here that we have an action for auth login. If you wanted to find this action, you could just type the word auth, and you're going to see that there's a whole set of actions right here that are for authentication. So you can log the user in, create an account, do phone sign in, password reset, email, update password. There's a whole set of authentication functions that you could take advantage of. Like I said, if you were hand coding this, it'd be very, very hard and it takes a long time, but this keeps things easy. So we'll make sure this says login. Auth provider is email. Auth provider essentially just means how are you going to log the user in? What like form of identity verification do we want Firebase to use? Because Firebase can verify my identity using Google, Apple, Facebook, JWT token, GitHub. They have so many different providers, but auth provider email means email and password. So we're telling Firebase, hey Firebase, I'm going to give you an email and password, and I want you to find the user based on their email and password. If I change it to something like Google, it's probably going to trigger a Google flow that's going to open up an in-app browser, allow somebody to click sign in with Google, and then Firebase is going to handle that whole flow for you. But we don't really care for that. We want this to be email and password, right? So I'll click email. We'll make sure that the email field is mapped to the email field and password is mapped to password, okay? And the way you can double check this is that if you want to know where this email address is coming from, we'll essentially click on the input, and the widget name at the top right is the widget name that you would be referencing in the action flow if you wanted to get the user's input from that specific widget. So look, email address is the same as this email address. And say I change this to like _1 real quick just to prove a point. And I click here, you're gonna notice that this changes to _1 too, because that's the email address field that it was connected to. So that's how you connect input fields and get the data from an input field. Beautiful. Let's test this out to see if authentication works. And while that test mode is loading, I'm going to show you in the Firebase dashboard. If you go to build and then tap authentication, you're going to see right here under users, this is going to show you a list of all the users who have logged into your platform. It's really fun when you launch your app and you see a bunch of users. I'll show you one of my real apps virally that has, I don't know, probably like 30,000 users at this point or even more. Look. This is what it looks like if you have a ton of users. So I can just keep going for days and you're going to see all these users who are logged into my app. And so that's a lot of fun when you start seeing users flow in. Yeah. So we'll go back to FlutterFlow Master Course. You're going to see there's no users right now. But as soon as this app is done loading, we're going to try creating a user. And if we do our job correctly, then that user will get created in Firebase. So beautiful. It says create account. We're going to say aleem@live.com. Aleem123 is the password. Hit get started. Okay, the given sign-in provider is disabled for this Firebase project. Enable it in the Firebase console under the sign-in method of the auth section. So FlutterFlow does a decent job of giving us good error messages so that we know what to do. Essentially what we need to do is go back to authentication, hit sign-in method right here, and here's where we need to tell Firebase what sign-in methods we want to enable for our project. And currently the only sign-in method I care about is email and password. So I'm going to tap email password and enable it here. Then hit save. That will allow users to log in with email and password. Now I'll come back and hit get started. Okay, so it just logged me in. And based on the page I set here, the logged in page, that's where the app rerouted me to. So if I hit get started and open up this action flow editor, I just want to show you something. Right here, there was a setting called navigate automatically. Because I enabled this on, essentially what I'm saying is, hey, FlutterFlow, I want you to rely on the settings to navigate the user after they create their account. But if I said don't navigate automatically, then what I could do is add an action here to manually navigate the user to wherever I want to take them. So that's an important setting to understand, like if you have a custom onboarding flow. For example, like if I'm creating an account for the first time, I want to send my users to an onboarding flow sometimes. So I would turn off this navigate automatically and then manually navigate them to the first step of my onboarding flow. I talk about the importance of onboarding flows and how you can use them to create, high converting revenue generating apps inside of Dreams into Apps. I give my whole self-selling onboarding flow framework. But like pretty much all you need to know is like, if you're building an app that's monetized, that has a paywall or an in-app subscription, I highly recommend that you design an onboarding flow that qualifies your user, ensures this app is the right fit for them, personalizes their experience, and then serves them a paywall so that they actually pay you to use the app. That's been the secret, and that's what all successful apps do. Cool. So let's go back to Firebase, and if you refresh this users page here, you'll see that that user I just created is now here. So we successfully implemented the create account functionality. That's super exciting. But now I want to test the log out and sign back in. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually create a log out system. So what I'm going to do here is go to 1rep max, and I'm going to actually show you how to create tabs at the bottom. So with 1rep max enabled, right here it says navbar item properties. It's going to say show on navbar. I want you to enable that item that says show on navbar, and you should get this yellow error that says navbar is currently off in app settings. By clicking on that error, it's going to take you to the navbar settings page. This navbar settings page will have show navbar as off. Okay, we want to turn navbar on, and I'll show you what this is going to do in just a moment. But now we have a new error. Navbar requires at least 2 pages to have show on navbar set. What does that mean? Well, in order for you to show those tabs at the bottom of your app, we need to have at least 2 pages activated. So what we will do is go back here, and the next page that I want to create is a profile page so that I can create like a logout button there. I'll go to my page builder, add a new page. Then I'm going to search for a page template called profile. That's not showing anything up, so I'm going to refresh. Cool. Click this. Still not sure why I'm not seeing anything. There you go. All profile. Beautiful. So we get a bunch of these profile ideas. I'm going to select a very basic one like this one. I'll hit my theme, type in profile, hit create page. Okay. So here I have a profile page, and I want to go down to the navbar item properties and enable show on navbar. Okay. That is going to satisfy the requirements for having 2 of these items here. Then I'll say label, profile. Okay. Icon size, we'll leave that alone. Boom, boom, boom. I'll go back to settings, go to navbar and app bar. And now I can actually adjust some of the styles. See, I can hit show labels unselected. And this is going to show the name of the page at the bottom. And sometimes that can be pretty cool. So I'm going to keep that on just to make things easy. There's a bunch of other settings here that you can totally mess around with, and I encourage you to do so. But as you can see here, we just created this nav bar at the bottom that allows users to go from home to profile. If I go to 1rep max, I can actually change the name of this to 1rep, or I can call this calculator since it's essentially just a calculator. Calculator. Boom. Nice. Okay, so then we'll go to profile. Okay, and on this log out button, if we hit the action flow editor, you'll see that there's already an action here for log out. So that will get handled for us. Some of these other things are not really implemented right now, so I'm going to just hide them. Or by hide, I just straight up mean delete. I'm just going to delete them. Now I want to show you another thing. Okay, delete this piece of text, and right here on this text, we actually want to feed in the real email address of the user who is logged in. So how do you do that? Check this out. Click on text, and then we are going to bind, using our data binding technique, the email address of the person who's logged in. So how do you do that? Well, we can bind using the authenticated user source. Authenticated user means a piece of data that has everything to do with the user who is authenticated. And authenticated just means signed in. So if you click on authenticated user, you'll see right here, there's a bunch of options that we have. So when a user gets created in our database, we have access to things like the email, the user ID. We don't have a display name because we didn't ask our user to set one. And we don't have their phone number because we didn't ask the user to set one. But we do have their email. So if you click on their email, you can actually bind the email from the person who's logged in. And unfortunately, I don't have like an image or like a profile image here. So I'm just going to delete that and say image type asset or uploaded file. No, asset. And then I'm just going to upload an image from my computer. I have probably an Ambitious Labs image that I'll use. Yep, I have like a Figma image that I'll just use as a placeholder. And then I'm gonna get rid of this X. Beautiful. So all I have is a logout button here and then the email. Nice. So now I'll go back to test mode and reload my app. All right, so finished loading here, and now you can see at the bottom we have calculator and profile. Notice when I hit the profile, my email is now popping up because we binded it to the authenticated user. That's super exciting, but now I can click profile, hit log out, and that's gonna take me to the authentication page where I'm gonna try to log in using that user that I created, hit sign in, and boom, it takes me right back in. So my authentication is working. And if you followed me along, you should have your authentication working as well. And this is a very basic implementation of having a very simple app that you could potentially even launch to the store as a 1-rep max calculator. Like, no joke, there's nothing stopping you from taking this app and launching it to the store, branding it as a 1-rep max calculator, maybe adding more features onto it and charging money for it. Like, literally, you just built an app that totally solves a problem, and you did it in just less than an hour maybe, and got it going. But right on. So what we just did is we created a collection for a workout, but we are missing one thing here. In Firestore, and in any database really, you have to have a way to identify who this workout belongs to in terms of users, right? Imagine you have a Google Sheet and you have a list of all the workouts from all your users. Well, how do you know what user it belongs to? Well, we're gonna need a user column, and typically this user column is something called a foreign key in database design, or in Firestore and in FlutterFlow, you call this document reference, okay? Document reference is gonna make sense in just a moment when I tell you what a document is. And you may know what the word reference means. Reference means like association, or how something relates to another document or another thing, right? So pretty much this is what our workout collection is going to look like. And collection is a term that's specific to a Firebase database, and I'll read you the formal definition. A Firebase collection is like a folder that holds a group of related items called documents in Firebase Firestore. Each document contains data like a set of fields, similar to labels and values. For example, a collection called users could have documents for each user with details like their name, email, and age, right? Think of it this way. A collection is the folder, a document is a file in the folder, and then inside the document, you store data like the name and email, okay? So collections help you keep your app's data organized and easy to manage. So what we just did is we defined exactly that. We have the labels or the fields, and then each one of those labels is going to have a collection of data. However, one important thing to note is that Firestore is not a spreadsheet-like database. It's actually a JSON database. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I do need you to know that. Firestore is a JSON database, meaning it stores JSON objects, okay? And I'm gonna tell you in just a moment what JSON objects are after you kind of see this in action, okay? All right, so now I wanna drive this all to the finish by creating my workout to-do list app. So let's start off by creating a new page, and this new page, I'm gonna call it a list, and essentially it's gonna be a list of workouts that we add, and we will then just mark them as done, and they will remove. So I'm gonna use this template right here, list 06 user search. I think it looks like something I can hack together to create a workout to-do list app. So let's say workout to-do list, create the page, beautiful. I'm gonna change the text up top to workout to-do list, okay? I'm gonna remove this text field, and I'm gonna click on the row and see if I can align everything to the right. Doesn't look like that is working, so I'm gonna use the main axis alignment. Okay, and I'm gonna change this to a plus sign, or I'll say add plus, boom. I'll get rid of this list view, this members and project, and this container. I'll get rid of this too. Let's see if I can remove actually. I can't really do that. Okay, I can do that to here though. Boom, and get rid of the app bar. Actually, I'll keep the app bar. Cool. Then what I'll do is right here, I'm gonna remove this. And essentially what we'll do is we're gonna make each one of these rows, we're gonna make this represent one of our workouts. I'm gonna remove all these other ones and I'm going to unbind whatever's here, okay? I'm also gonna enable show on app bar and I'm gonna type this workouts, or I'm gonna call this tracker, okay? And we'll change this to something like muscle. Doesn't give me that. Let's say workout, fitness, run. There you go. Let's say run. Beautiful. And here we're going to type workout name. And then for view, we're going to say done. Okay. And it looks like this icon that I had here went away. So I'm going to search for icon, drop the icon here, change this to add again. Nice. Okay. So here's how this is going to work. Every time a user taps on the add icon, I'm going to prompt a box that allows me to type in a workout that I'm going to do. So let's implement that feature. Next step is to head back over to pages, and we are going to add a component by tapping this. We'll say something like card views. Let's find one for an input field or content view. I think I saw one for, yep, input field right here. We'll say input workout, create component. Nice. So I'm going to change this comment to add new workout. I'm going to get rid of all this extra stuff. Okay, and then here I'm going to change this from send to add. I'm going to get rid of this icon. All right, beautiful. So when a user clicks on add, I want to create a record in my database. So heading back to Firebase, if you go to build and tap on Firestore database, that'll take you to the Firestore section here. Notice that there's nothing on this page, but it does say start collection. We're not going to click this. I want you to see how we'll control collections from FlutterFlow. So heading back to FlutterFlow, this tab right here is your Firestore tab. This is the tab that you're going to use to tell FlutterFlow what your data or your collections look like so that FlutterFlow can easily read and write your collections without breaking the structure of the collections. So you can define schema, just means collection or the shape of your collection, like the definition of it. So if I click on create collection and I type workout to do, okay, and I hit create, what I can do here is I can define what a workout to do is. And we already did this in the FigJam exercise, right? So we said workout underscore name. And whenever you are working with databases or data or anything that's like computer science or you know, app related, if you're ever naming like fields or variables, I like to use underscore casing, or you can use what's called camel casing. Workout name with the first letter lowercase and then the first letter of every word thereafter uppercase. But normally when I'm working with databases, I like to use lowercase. So I'll say workout underscore name. This is going to be a string. Then I'll say is done. This is going to be a Boolean. And then I'm going to say user. and then we're going to say document reference. Document reference is going to want us to tell it what document we need to reference. But we just ran into a small problem. I actually don't have a document here that represents each user. That's actually a big problem. We need to set up our authentication to create a user object anytime, or a user document anytime a new user account is created. So check this out. When I hit get started, let's look at that action flow editor. We didn't enable this option right here, create user document. We need to enable that. And there is essentially a setting that will create a document anytime a new user account is created. But we need to tell it what collection to add a document to. And as of right now, we don't have a user collection. So I'm gonna go back to Firestore, hit plus, type in the word users and hit create. FlutterFlow knows that we're trying to create a user collection, and it will ask us if we want to pre-populate it with default fields. We can just hit yes, and we can take all these fields that FlutterFlow already has and then go back to the create account flow. And right here, you'll see that the created document collection is now set to users. We don't need to do anything else. We are just going to let FlutterFlow automatically update the email on the account. We're not asking for any other information, but if you were to ask for like username and say even a profile picture, you could use that set field setting to actually set that extra piece of information. So beautiful. Now we can go back to workout to do. And if we type user here, we can click document reference and then say reference type users. The next one we need to do is date completed, and we'll say date time for the data type. So now we just created essentially like the definition of a workout to do, and we can easily read and write data to this collection. And I'm gonna show you exactly how we're gonna do that. All right, so now we are ready to insert data into this collection. So I'm gonna head back to our component here for input workout. When a user clicks on add, I want to insert a document into that collection. So I'm going to add an action trigger here. Then we will go to backend database, Firestore, create document. Right here, you can select the collection that you want to insert into. We're going to tap on workout to do. Here's where we set the fields. So essentially, we're setting the values for those columns that we were talking about here. So value source, we'll say from variable. And then we will bind this variable from the widget state, and we're going to grab the text field. That text field probably wasn't named the best. We need to come here, click on text field, and then rename this to workout name text field. Okay. And then I'm going to remove the leave reply here, and I'm going to say, what workout are you doing? Okay. And now when I hit add, we will make sure that this is binded to the workout name text field that you see here. Beautiful. Now we'll add another field, is done. It's going to be set to false. Okay. And right here we have specific value false. User, we're going to set this to authenticated user reference. So every document has a reference, and a reference is just like an ID. Every time that you create a document, that document will have a ID. An ID stands for identifier. Just like you have a driver's license number, a passport number, every time that you add a document to a database, it's going to have a unique ID. No two documents can have the same unique ID. This is why databases are so powerful, because you have this thing called an ID, which represents one record. So IDs in Firestore and FlutterFlow are also referred to as references or ref. So ref means like the ID or the identifier or the reference or the kind of like handle to that specific document. So this user reference means the identifier of that user. So we're going to say, hey, the user whom this workout belongs to is the authenticated user's reference. Okay. So now I have workout name is done in user. Date completed. We haven't completed this yet, so I'm just not going to set it. Okay. So when a user hits add workout, we're going to add the document to the database or create it. Then we're going to do another action here that says widget UI interactions, and we are going to say, actually, it should be something like, oh, right here, close dialog. Beautiful. So when the record is created, we are going to close this box that's going to show up. Okay, but how do you even show this box in the first place? Well, let's go back to Workout To-Do List, click on the plus icon, open the action flow editor. On tap, we add an action, and here we're going to say open, or we're going to say alerts notifications, and we're going to say alert dialog, custom dialog, and here you get to select the component of your custom dialog. We're going to say input workout, and no parameters. Parameters are essentially ways that you can pass data from one page or one component to another, but we don't need to do that in this case. So all we need to do is make sure that this dialog opens. That's pretty much all we need to do. So now let's go test this by creating a new test mode session. Cool, so our app is online and it's time to test this out. Let's go to tracker. We'll hit the plus, and it looks like this pop-up did pop up. And if I just say something like bench press and hit add, the pop-up will go away. But did the document add to the database? Well, we have two ways of checking that. The way I like to do it is by going to Firebase, I always say that, and refreshing the Firestore page to see that we have a collection here now called Workout To Do. There's a document, and this is the document ID I was telling you about. So everything right here in the middle is a list of all the documents that you have, and this is the document ID or the document reference. Check this out. We have workout name, the user that it belongs to, which is the reference to the user, and then is done is set to false. So this is actually working. Well, the final step now is to get this page to render a list of all the workouts. So the cool thing is that we're already wrapped here in a list view. And a list view is a special component by FlutterFlow that allows you to connect it to a collection, or you can query a collection, which means to search a collection, and render items in a list based on how many items come back in that collection. So we can say list view, connect to a backend query. So we can say backend query, add query. Query type is query collection. The collection here is workout to do. And we can pretty much say, hey, connect this list view to a Firebase collection and just give me everything. Don't filter it, and hit confirm. When we hit confirm, notice how these items just automatically replicate. When you click on text and we try to bind this text now, you'll notice that there's a new source field here called workout to do document. This is saying that for every item in the list, you get access to one document. And so for every workout to do document that's in the collection, we're going to be able to grab the workout name and map it to the screen here. So let's now just incrementally test it here. Oops, let me get rid of this extra test mode. And when we refresh the page, you're going to see, ideally, you're going to see that bench press exists here. And if we do it again and we say squats and hit add, now squats exists here. But if we click on done, well, nothing's happening. Well, now we need to implement the done functionality by tapping on the done button, going to action flow editor, and on tap, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to update the document that we're clicking on, and we're going to use the user, not the user's reference. I'm sorry, it's getting a little late. We're going to use the reference of the workout to do. We're going to say document properties reference, and essentially we're going to say, hey, update this document. And we're going to give it the reference of the document that we want to update. And the only field we want to update is done, and we're going to set this to true. So when the button is clicked, we're going to set that document to true. Let's test and make sure that works, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to get rid of that document on the page. And you might have already guessed it if you caught a detail that I skipped over. So now when a user clicks on done here, it should update the document in our database to true. Notice here now, both of these isDones is set to true. Firestore is a real-time database. So as you make updates to it, all of the apps that are reading that data from the database is going to update automatically. But the thing is, when we click on done, we want this to either disappear or we want this to go from done to something else. If you wanted it to disappear, what you can do is you can update your query here and you can say filter by isDone equal to false. And that would filter out all of the items in the list. And essentially when you hit done, it would get rid of one. Or what you can do is you can change this button for like a green check mark by using the conditional visibility here. And you could say only show this if workout to do isDone is equal to false. But what I'm going to do for sake of just simplicity is I'm just going to modify that query to say filter for everything where isDone is equal to false. Now I'll go back to test mode and I'm going to check this out. Beautiful. We'll go to tracker and nothing is here. So now I'll click add. This time we'll say bicep curls. Okay, add. Bicep curls exists. And when I hit done, it marks bicep curls in the database as done. And the filter does its job and doesn't show anything here. So we've successfully built a workout to-do list app. And you've now learned how to create a document in the database and filter documents when you read them and update them. The only thing that's missing is delete. And delete's pretty simple too. All you would need to do if you wanted to delete is say we added an icon. We can add an icon to the right here. We'll add like 5 pixels of padding. We can change the icon to a trash. Okay. And when somebody clicks on this trash, it's very simple. We add action. We type delete document in Firestore, and then we just set the reference of the workout to do. And when somebody taps delete, it will just straight up delete it from the database. And on that note, you just learned literally create, read, update, and delete. Pretty straightforward. Congratulations, you just learned everything that you need to know to build a successful app using FlutterFlow and Firebase. I'm super confident in this tech stack and it can scale to millions of users because as you're dragging and dropping, pointing and clicking, you're building real high quality Flutter-based code that's perfectly capable of serving millions. If you're super serious about launching your app idea, you're a startup founder, a business owner, and you want to surround yourself with like-minded people who are launching apps every single week, and maybe you want to have an entire team of dedicated technical coaches right by your side to help you as you go through this app development process, you should definitely consider joining Dreams into Apps, our flagship program. It's a 12-week long accelerator where you're part of a community and going through an entire course that I've crafted myself. Think of it like the intersection of full stack development and an MBA. We're literally teaching you the technical skills and the business skills to go from idea to launching your app and generating real revenue. We've had over 500 students go through the program. We've been in business for over 2 years. Our students have done amazing things. Iomi went off to raise $240K in venture capital and get into Techstars after taking Dreams into Apps. Most recently, John integrated the Tesla API and built like his own Carfax for Tesla. He's generating revenue. He has great partnerships. And Nick recently built his own goal tracking app to replace like a Google Sheet type of tracking system that him and his dad were doing. And now he's almost full-time scaling this app. He's generating thousands of dollars in revenue. And it's a very unique goal tracking app that he's scaling to his friends, family, and now he's marketing it to more people. Vora was an app that Luis launched. It's a buy one, get one free deals app for local restaurants in Monterrey, Mexico. And as you can see here, he built the app himself. He quit his job as a business analyst. Now he's ranking like in the charts for food and drink. He's full-time. He's raised venture capital for this, and he's generating some pretty significant revenue. So if you're super serious about launching your idea, definitely check out the link in the description to apply to join Dreams into Apps. We guarantee that we take you from idea to launch, and we have an action-packed calendar pretty much all day, every day, where you can join classes on FlutterFlow, design, marketing, API integrations, AI, and we just are doing so much. So if you're interested in building your app, definitely click the link below and subscribe for more free tutorials on app development and entrepreneurship. My name is Aleem, founder of Ambitious Labs. It was a pleasure to have you throughout this journey. Take care.